The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, each drop hammering like fate against the rusted mailbox that carried her name, Lena Carter, a woman the world had already forgotten, until tonight. Inside that envelope, soaked and trembling, was a letter that would change everything, an inheritance from a man she barely remembered, promising a fortune buried beneath the tides. The paper smelled of salt and secrets, its words written in gold ink, "Claim what's yours before the sea does." And as lightning split the sky, Lena realized this wasn't a blessing. It was a summons from the past, and it had finally arrived. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, each drop hammering like fate against the rusted mailbox that carried her name. Lena Carter, a woman the world had already forgotten, until tonight. Inside that envelope, soaked and trembling, was a letter that would change everything, an inheritance from a man she barely remembered, promising a fortune buried beneath the tides. The paper smelled of salt and secrets, its words written in gold ink, "Claim what's yours before the sea does." And as lightning split the sky, Lena realized this wasn't a blessing, it was a summons from the past. And it had finally arrived. She sat in the flickering light of a failing lamp, the room around her half empty, like her life, boxes she never unpacked, dreams she never chased, divorce papers still unsigned on the counter, as if her heart couldn't finish the sentence her husband had started. The heater groaned in protest, breathing out air colder than the truth she lived in. She was broke, alone, and one late payment away from losing everything. Her fingers traced the seal again, an insignia she didn't recognize. A crown, half sunken beneath waves, beneath the tide. The phrase lingered, whispering through her like an old lullaby sung by someone who never loved her enough. She unfolded the letter, careful not to tear the delicate edges. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, from another time. "To my niece, Lena Carter. If you are reading this, I am gone. The estate of Silverstrand and its holdings, including the property known as the King's Tide Casino, now pass to you. You alone have the right to claim it. Be warned. The tide keeps its own debts." Her heart stumbled on the last line. The tide keeps its own debts. The King's Tide Casino. She vaguely remembered hearing about it when she was a child. Whispers of a place that once glittered brighter than Vegas, where the ocean kissed marble steps and men lost everything in a single roll of dice. Then, one night, a storm had come and swallowed it whole. People said the sea claimed it out of vengeance. Others said something darker had pulled it under. Lena looked up, watching the rain streak down the window like tears she refused to shed. An inheritance, she muttered to herself, half laughing, from a man who never called. Still, something inside her shifted, a small, defiant spark that had survived years of silence and failure. She'd spent so long waiting for life to change on its own. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the universe giving her one last hand to play. She searched online. Silverstrand, California, population 2,307, coastal town, forgotten by time, reclaimed by sea. The images showed abandoned piers and flooded streets, ghosts of an era trapped in the salt. And there it was, the casino, its once golden sign, now half submerged beneath green water, still spelled faintly through corrosion and algae. King's Tide. Her chest tightened. It was real, but with reality came something else, a tremor of unease. Why her? Why now? Why a place that looked more like a shipwreck than an inheritance? The old ceiling light flickered again, and for a moment the room dimmed to black. In that heartbeat of darkness she saw it, an image she couldn't explain. Marble floors buried under water, chandeliers swinging in the current, cards drifting like bones. Then the light returned and she was alone again, alone with the letter, alone with the weight of possibility. She rose, pacing slowly. Her reflection in the window looked foreign, tired eyes, untamed hair, a woman aged by choices she never made. She whispered to it, "You can't afford another dream." But her voice trembled because she already knew she was going. The next morning, dawn arrived bruised and grey. The rain had thinned, but the roads were slick, glistening like liquid glass. Lena packed the essentials, her old duffel bag, the letter, a thermos of coffee that smelled faintly burnt. She left behind unpaid bills and the silence of a home that was never hers to keep. As she turned the key one last time, something in her chest ached, not for the past, but for the version of herself that once believed in safety. The storm had taken that woman long ago. The drive was long, winding through highways lined with fog and decay, rusted gas stations, empty motels with flickering vacancy signs. Each mile felt like a descent, not just into distance, but into something buried deep beneath her own surface. She thought about her daughter, Emmett, 12 years old, living with her father in another state. She hadn't called in months. How could she? What would she say? Mom's chasing a ghost story for money. No. She'd find something real before reaching out. Something worth being proud of again. The rain returned halfway through the journey, heavier this time. Wipers fought against it, groaning like tired lungs. Lightning stitched across the sky in crooked veins, illuminating cliffs that dropped straight into roaring surf. The radio died an hour ago, leaving only the rhythmic beat of water and the hum of the engine to keep her company. As night fell, the sign appeared through the mist, a rusted board swaying in the wind. "Welcome to Silverstrand, Pop." The last number was unreadable, washed away long ago. The town was barely breathing. Shuttered shops, windows boarded, a diner with a single bulb buzzing above its door like it refused to die. The air smelled of seaweed and memory. She pulled into a small inn near the harbor, its neon sign stuttering, Seabird Motel. Inside, the clerk barely looked up. "You here for the salvage project?" he asked, voice coarse like driftwood. "Something like that," Lena replied. He slid over a tarnished key. "Room 3. Don't go near the docks after dark. Tide's been strange lately." She nodded, forcing a faint smile. "Thanks for the warning." But his eyes didn't lift from the counter. "Ain't a warning, it's advice." Lena carried her bag down the narrow hallway, each step creaking under her weight. The room smelled faintly of salt and bleach. She dropped her bag on the bed, staring out the cracked window toward the bay. The ocean was out there, black and endless, whispering to her through the wind. She unrolled the letter again, tracing the final line with trembling fingers. "Be warned, the tide keeps its own debts." For a long moment, she just listened to the rain, to her heartbeat, to the sea calling her name from miles away. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the horizon like an awakening. As the night deepened, Lena realized the story was only beginning. The storm had quieted by morning, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. A low fog clung to the coastline, swallowing the edges of Silverstrand like a ghost reluctant to fade. Lena stood at her motel window, coffee trembling in her hand, watching gulls drift through the mist. The letter lay open beside her, edges curling from the damp. She read it again, though she already knew every word by heart. Each line felt like a pulse from the past, calling her deeper into something she didn't yet understand. She looked at herself in the mirror, pale light, sleepless eyes, a woman trying to remember who she used to be before disappointment became routine. For years, she'd survived on autopilot, working double shifts, counting coins, pretending tomorrow would be better. But now, for the first time in forever, there was a direction. A strange one, yes, but a direction nonetheless. The motel's heater rattled as she packed her things. Outside, puddles reflected a bruised sky. The air smelled of iron and salt. She started the car, the engine coughing awake like an old memory, and followed the road that wound toward the water. Silver strands stretched before her, once glamorous, now forgotten. Crumbling mansions with seaweed crawling up their steps. Empty storefronts with faded lettering from decades ago. She passed a weathered billboard half wallowed by vines. The King's Tide Casino fortune awaits beneath the stars. A slogan from another life. She parked near the docks. The sea hissed against the broken pylons, whispering secrets in every ripple. Beyond the fog, she could just make out the jagged silhouette of a building, domed roof, shattered sign, and a faint glimmer where the water kissed its glass, the casino. The sight hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just a structure. It was a monument to something grand and decayed like hope itself. A man's voice startled her. "You shouldn't be here." She turned. A fisherman stood at the edge of the dock, face carved by wind and years. He held a cigarette between two trembling fingers, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his cap. "I'm looking for the King's Tide Casino," she said cautiously. He gave a dry laugh. "Found it, didn't you?" He nodded toward the half-drowned palace beyond the waves. "Or what's left of it. Do you know who owns it?" He studied her, squinting as if trying to see the ghost behind her face. "Used to belong to a man named Ezra Carter. The king, they called him. Owned half this town before the sea took its cut." Lena froze. "Ezra Carter?" He nodded. "That was before my time, but the stories. They stick around. You his kin, his niece." She admitted softly. The man's cigarette dropped into the water. "Then you ought to be careful, miss. That place don't just drown buildings, it drowns people. Whole crews went missing trying to drain it back in the 80s. Some say the king's still down there, guarding his gold." She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Ghost stories," he shrugged. "Stories start somewhere." As she walked away, his words followed her heavy, unshakable. She felt the sea watching, listening. Each wave that broke against the rocks seemed to whisper, "Debt, debt, debt." By midday, she found the property records office, a squat brick building with dust older than its clerk. Inside, papers yellowed like old bones. The woman behind the counter barely looked up from her crossword. "Looking for ownership records," Lena said. "King's Tide Casino." The clerk sighed, adjusted her glasses, and disappeared into the archives. Minutes dragged into an hour before she returned with a cracked binder. "Here," she said, placing it on the counter, "filed under Carter Ezra." Lena flipped through brittle pages until she found it. A deed signed in elegant ink, the same handwriting as her letter, her uncle's signature strong, deliberate. There were also notes in the margins: "Do not release until rightful heir presents claim," and beside it, a symbol, the crown beneath the waves. Her pulse quickened. Everything matched. The letter wasn't a scam or coincidence. It was real. She thanked the clerk and stepped outside, clutching the document like a lifeline. The wind had picked up again, bringing with it the sharp taste of salt and storm. She returned to the car and sat there for a long moment, listening to the ocean breathe. Beneath the crash of waves, she thought she heard something else, a low hum, rhythmic, mechanical, like machinery buried deep underwater. But when she turned off the engine, the sound vanished. Doubt crept in. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was her imagination, or maybe, somewhere below the tide, something was waiting to be found. She drove closer to the shoreline until the pavement gave way to gravel and the gravel to sand. There, she stood at the edge of the flooded ruin, the King's Tide Casino, rising like a ghost ship from the shallows. Its glass windows were shattered, draped with strands of kelp. Rusted chandeliers hung like drowned constellations. Once, white marble steps disappeared beneath dark water. The main entrance doors, though half submerged, still bore a crest, the same crown she'd seen in the letter's seal. Her breath caught. This was it? Her inheritance? Her curse? She stepped forward, waves soaking through her shoes, her reflection rippling across the broken glass doors. She could almost see the ghosts of gamblers laughing inside, champagne flutes raised, the sound of music echoing from somewhere far beneath the surface. Then a flash of movement just for a moment deep within the waterlogged lobby, a shadow drifting across the light. She blinked, leaning closer. Nothing, only her own reflection staring back, distorted by the tide. Still, her pulse wouldn't slow. As dusk began to fall, the clouds thickened once more. The sun bled out behind the horizon, and the casino shimmered faintly, its underwater lights or perhaps reflections of the dying day flickering like an invitation. Lena whispered into the wind, "If you left me this, Uncle Ezra, tell me why." No answer came, only the sound of the ocean rising, and the faint echo of something metallic groaning beneath the waves, like a door remembering it once could open. She stepped back slowly, soaked and shivering, her eyes locked on the dark silhouette of her inheritance. In that moment, she didn't yet understand the warning in the letter that the tide keeps its own debts. But as the fog rolled in and the casino disappeared beneath it, she felt it watching her, waiting, and as the night deepened, Lena knew she would return at dawn no matter what the sea demanded in return. The morning arrived gray and breathless, as if the world itself was holding its lungs before a confession. The tide had retreated just enough to reveal more of the casino's broken skeleton. Mist coiled around its domed roof, wrapping the structure in silver ribbons of fog. Lena stood at the shore, her boots half buried in wet sand, staring at the monument that had haunted her sleep. Last night's storm had passed, but its echo still lived in the waves. Every crash of surf against the concrete husk seemed to whisper her name. The King's Tide Casino, half submerged, half dreaming, waited like something alive and patient. Lena zipped her coat higher, the letter folded neatly in her pocket, and began her approach. The closer she moved, the colder the air became. Salt clung to her tongue, and the wind carried the scent of rust and rot. Broken glass crunched beneath her steps, each fragment reflecting a flicker of pale light, as if the building itself still remembered its old brilliance. At the foot of the marble steps, now veined with cracks and seaweed, she hesitated. A gull landed nearby, its cry slicing through the silence. Somewhere beneath, water sloshed against unseen walls, deep and hollow. She took a deep breath. "You wanted me here," she murmured to the sea. "I'm here." The lobby doors groaned as she pushed them open. A gush of cold air spilled out, thick with the smell of mildew, salt, and thyme. Inside, the once grand foyer stretched before her, a cavern of decay and beauty. Sunlight pierced through the shattered ceiling, casting shifting bands of gold across flooded floors. Coral had crept up the marble pillars, glowing faintly in the gloom. Barnacles clung to chandeliers that swayed gently in the tide. Each detail spoke of a long, slow surrender to the ocean's will. Lena waded forward, her reflection rippling beside old slot machines frozen in rust. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the faint hum of distant water, the creak of metal bending under pressure, and the ghosts of forgotten music. She imagined what it had once been, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the roulette wheels spinning beneath chandeliers. A place where people believed in luck, unaware they were already part of its downfall. As she explored, she found remnants of luxury. A grand piano toppled on its side, its keys bleached and warped by salt. Velvet curtains turned to ribbons. A brass sign still read "Welcome to the King's Tide Ballroom." Beneath it, moss had grown into strange patterns, almost like letters she couldn't quite read. Every step took her deeper into the past, and with every step she felt a strange familiarity, not in the place itself, but in its feeling, a ruin still pretending to be beautiful. Near the reception desk, she found an old ledger encased in a cracked glass display. She brushed away grime and read the faded ink. Guest of honor, Ezra Carter, grand opening night 1958. Her uncle's name, the letters shimmered faintly under her touch. For a brief second, she swore the ink was wet again, like time itself was bleeding. A shiver rippled through her, then movement. A small shape darted in the water beside her. She froze, heart pounding, but it was only a fish, pale and blind, gliding through the submerged lobby as if it too had never left. She knelt, watching it disappear beneath the staircase, and noticed something else. A faint flicker coming from deeper inside. Light. It pulsed once, twice, then vanished. Her rational mind told her it was a reflection. Sunlight on glass, but something deeper, a quiet instinct, whispered otherwise. She crossed the hall, her boots sloshing through knee-deep water. The light returned again, this time from behind a half-collapsed door. She pushed it open, revealing a corridor leading toward the lower levels of the casino. Down there, the air changed. It felt heavier, as though every breath had to push through the weight of years. The walls glistened with condensation. On one side, faded murals stretched across the plaster, paintings of gamblers and kings, their faces serene, hands resting on piles of gold coins, but the eyes looked wrong, too lifelike, too watchful. She followed the corridor until it ended at a spiral staircase descending into darkness. A metal sign above read, "Staff access restricted." Her flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing flooded steps leading downward. The water was black and still. For a moment she hesitated, but curiosity outweighed fear. She descended slowly, each step echoing in hollow metallic rhythm. The water rose to her knees, then her waist. The beam of her flashlight trembled against the surface, scattering reflections like broken glass. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, the lower floor half wallowed by the sea. Columns of light pierced through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the drowned remains of a once glorious casino floor. Tables lay overturned, poker chips scattered like relics. At the far end of the hall, something massive loomed, a round door half buried in shadow. Steel, thick as a fortress, a vault. Lena's breath caught. Her footsteps slowed as she approached it. The vault was embossed with the same crown insignia, the mark she'd seen on the letter. Its wheel lock was corroded, sealed shut by time and tide. Around its edges, faint carvings wound through the metal, symbols she couldn't decipher, forming a pattern that seemed to pulse faintly when her light passed over them. She knelt, running her fingers across the cold surface. Even through rust it felt warm, like something beneath was alive. "Is this what you left me, uncle?" she whispered. A tomb or a treasure? A sudden creak echoed through the chamber. She spun around, the beam of her flashlight darting across pillars and shadows. Nothing, only the sound of dripping water. But when she turned back, she noticed something new. Just above the vault's crown emblem, a small inscription, almost invisible under years of grime. "Fortune is the debt the living pay to the drowned." Her pulse quickened. She traced the words with shaking fingers. A chill ran through her spine, not from the cold, but from recognition. She had heard something like it before. The last line of her uncle's letter. "The tide keeps its own debts." She stumbled back, breath trembling. The realization hit her. Whatever lay behind that vault wasn't just wealth. It was legacy, a legacy buried for a reason. Suddenly her flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died, Darkness swallowed her. Her heartbeat thundered in the void. Somewhere metal groaned again, closer this time, a deep, resonant echo that seemed to come from the vault itself. She froze, holding her breath. Another sound followed, a faint, almost imperceptible thud from behind the door, then a second, like something shifting or breathing. "No," she whispered, "that's impossible." But even as she said it, the water at her feet rippled outward, gentle at first, then stronger. As if responding to something unseen, her trembling hands scrambled for the flashlight, finally coaxing it back to life. The beam shot across the chamber. Nothing had moved. But on the vault's surface, where her hand had touched moments ago, a single droplet of water had formed, sliding down slowly, tracing the crown's edge. She stepped back, chest heaving. The vault exhaled. Not air, pressure, a soft hiss, like a sigh escaping centuries of silence. Lena turned and fled, splashing through the water, her heart slamming in rhythm with her footsteps. Behind her, the echo of that faint exhale followed, steady and patient, like a creature testing its lungs for the first time. When she finally emerged into daylight, she collapsed against the cracked wall of the upper foyer, gasping. The sea wind rushed in, cool and sharp. The tide had risen again, licking at the marble steps, as though it wanted to reclaim her for daring to enter. She looked back once, through the broken doorway into the shadows below. The vault waited, silent now, but not asleep, and deep inside, beneath the tide, something had begun to stir. As the light dimmed and the ocean whispered its endless song, Lena knew this wasn't just an inheritance. It was an invitation, and soon she would have to decide whether to open the door or seal it forever. By the time Lena returned to the motel, her clothes were soaked through, her boots leaving a trail of dark water across the linoleum floor. The old clerk behind the counter looked up briefly, his expression unreadable, then went back to pretending not to see her. In a town like Silverstrand, curiosity was a dangerous currency, and silence was the only thing that still had value. In her room, she peeled off the wet layers and sat on the bed, trembling from more than cold. Her fingers still tingled where she'd touched the vault. It wasn't imagination, she was sure of it. The door had breathed. It had exhaled, as if something within it had been waiting for someone to find it again. The letter lay on the nightstand, edges curled from dampness. She unfolded it one more time, tracing her uncle's handwriting under the dim light. "Be warned, the tide keeps its own debts." "What debts?" she whispered into the stillness. "What did you do, Ezra?" A gust of wind rattled the window, and for a moment it almost sounded like a laugh, faint, distant, mocking. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came in fragments, flashes of water rushing through golden hallways, chandeliers swaying underwater like jellyfish, and coins spinning endlessly in the dark. In one dream, she saw her uncle standing in the flooded lobby, his face hidden beneath the reflection of a crown. When she called to him, he turned, and where his eyes should have been, there was only the endless blue of the sea. She woke with a start, the taste of salt on her lips, the clock on the nightstand, and blinked 3:17 a.m. The air smelled faintly of brine. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced toward the window. Outside, the fog was thicker than ever, swirling like smoke over the harbor lights. And their faint but real glow shimmered on the horizon, not lightning, not moonlight, a single golden flicker, rising and falling from the direction of the casino. Lena threw on her coat and grabbed her keys. The road to the coast was nearly invisible under the mist. The world felt half, drowned, every sound muffled, every light distorted. Her car's headlights cut through the fog like weak lanterns on a ship lost at sea. When she finally reached the water's edge, she stopped and stepped out. The tide had receded again, revealing the broken path that led toward the casino's submerged entrance. The glow was gone now. Only the whisper of the sea remained. She hesitated, torn between fear and the same pull that had brought her here in the first place. That need to know. That voice inside her that said if she turned back now, she'd be haunted by it forever. The casino loomed ahead, its reflection shivering across the shallow waves. She crossed the old causeway, each step echoing into the fog. Her flashlight beam danced across the walls, peeling murals, rusted chandeliers, the bones of luxury. But something was different this time. The water that had filled the lobby before was lower. The tide had fallen farther than it should have, exposing stretches of marble floor that glimmered with wet dust. She knelt, running her hand across the stone. The air was colder here, but the surface was strangely warm, almost pulsing beneath her fingertips. Then she saw it carved into the marble near her feet, the same crown symbol. Only this one was incomplete, half based by time. Around it were faint lines that spiraled outward, like a diagram or map. She traced them with her light, following the design toward the center of the room, where they vanished beneath a pool of water. Her heart beat faster. A drainage system, she murmured. You were trying to hide something here. She followed the markings toward the back of the hall, where a cracked wall exposed a maintenance corridor. It led to what looked like an old generator room. The machinery was corroded, choked by years of salt and neglect. But beneath the grime, she could still see a control panel, levers, gauges, and a faded label. Drainage pumps, lower vault chambers. Her hands shook as she brushed the dust away. Could it still work? After all these years, she tested one of the switches. Nothing. Another. Still nothing. Then, from somewhere deep below, a faint vibration stirred, a sound like a sleeping beast turning in its bed. The lights above the panel flickered weakly, pulsing once before dying again. She leaned closer, heart racing. Come on, just one breath. A sudden click echoed, a motor whined to life, coughing through the silence. Water gurgled somewhere far beneath her, flowing through unseen channels. For a moment the sound was faint, then it deepened, rising through the walls like a heartbeat. The pumps were alive. She stumbled backward, both terrified and exhilarated. Decades of silence broken by the sound of moving water. The casino seemed to vibrate, its old bones stirring with new energy. Somewhere, far below, the vault waited, but then another sound, not mechanical, not water, footsteps. She froze, the blood in her veins turning to ice. The echo was faint, measured, deliberate, coming from the lobby. Hello, her voice cracked. No reply. She turned off her flashlight, pressing herself against the wall, listening. The steps grew louder, sloshing through the shallow pools, then silence again. Her breath caught. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity held her captive. She peeked around the corner. The fog from outside had drifted in through the shattered windows, forming pale ribbons across the hall. Nothing moved, only the whisper of tidewater licking the marble. Then, just as she exhaled, she saw it, a reflection. In the cracked glass of the old display case, behind her own distorted image, stood a figure. Tall, motionless, watching. Her heart seized. She spun around, but there was no one there. Only air, only mist. She stood frozen, trembling. The reflection had been too real, too sharp to be imagined. Suddenly, the pumps below gave a deep metallic groan, and the floor shuddered. Water began to churn violently, spinning in place as if caught in an unseen whirlpool. The room filled with the sound of suction, deep, resonant, pulling from beneath the foundations. She backed away, stumbling toward the stairs. The air thickened with the scent of rust and ozone. The pumps roared louder, metal screaming in protest. Then, with a jarring snap, one of the pipes burst along the wall, spraying a jet of black water that splattered across the ceiling. Lena covered her face, coughing, trying to see through the spray, and through the chaos she heard it again, the voice, not clear but there. A whisper carried through the water, low and rhythmic, like words spoken from miles away. "The debt must be paid." She froze. Who's there? Silence. Only the hiss of water draining back into the dark. Her heart pounded as she stumbled back toward the stairs. The pumps began to wind down, their roar fading into distant echoes. In the sudden quiet, she could hear her own breathing again, uneven, desperate. The casino settled. The floor stopped trembling. The water level seemed lower now, exposing the tops of golden banisters that hadn't seen air in decades. Whatever she had triggered, it had worked. The draining had begun, but at what cost? As she stepped out into the mist, dawn was breaking, a pale, trembling light stretching across the waves. The horizon burned with a soft orange glow, and for the first time since arriving, she saw the ocean pull back even farther, revealing the full skeleton of the casino. Towers and terraces once hidden beneath the tide now shimmered in wet gold. It was beautiful and terrifying. She stood at the edge of the causeway, breathing hard, the wind pulling at her hair. Somewhere behind her, in the depths below, water still moved slow, deliberate, like something awakening. And far beyond the horizon, thunder rolled again, faint but coming closer. She didn't know yet that the draining had already disturbed something ancient in the foundations, something that had been waiting since the night the King's Tide Casino sank beneath the waves. As the wind lifted her hair and the rising sun painted the water in blood, orange light, Lena whispered, "Whatever you're hiding, I'm coming for you." And deep below, in the dark chambers beneath the ballroom, the vault shuddered once as if it had heard her. By the time the sun climbed above the grey horizon, the sea had pulled back farther than anyone in Silverstrand had seen in decades. The air carried an uncanny stillness, no gulls, no waves, just the slow hiss of distant water withdrawing into silence. Lena stood at the edge of the causeway, staring at the exposed bones of the casino. What yesterday had been a half-drowned ruin was now a colossal carcass rising from the sea towers glistening with algae, marble pillars streaked with salt, and windows that glared like eyes unaccustomed to daylight. The pumps she'd triggered were still rumbling beneath her feet, their deep pulse echoing through the ground like a second heartbeat. The draining had begun in earnest. The bay's waterline had fallen overnight, leaving wet sand, broken shells, and twisted debris in its wake. And yet, standing there, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had been released along with the tide. She stepped forward cautiously, her boots sinking into the soft, brine-soaked earth. Every movement seemed amplified in the silence, the crunch of gravel, the slow drag of her breath. The closer she came, the more she could hear it. A faint groaning deep below the structure, metal bending under pressure, as if the casino itself were waking from a long, uneasy sleep. The entrance she'd once waded through was now dry. The glass doors gaped open like the mouth of some drowned god. Inside, the waterline had fallen several feet, revealing more of the lobby. What had been submerged the day before was now visible, columns crusted with coral, golden railings dulled to green, and faded murals emerging like ghosts from beneath their watery burial. Her flashlight swept across the walls. The paintings she had barely noticed before were clearer now. They depicted gamblers dressed in finery, faces blurred by age and algae. But between them, hidden in the brushstrokes, she saw things that didn't belong, waves that turned into faces, eyes in the water, hands reaching up from the sea toward the gamblers' tables. The hairs on her arms lifted. Whoever painted these hadn't been celebrating the casino's grandeur, they'd been warning it. As she moved deeper inside, the sound of dripping water echoed from every corner. The air was colder, thick with salt and rust. Her light glided over the grand staircase, its red carpet now a shredded ribbon curling into darkness. The once sparkling chandeliers hung at angles, their crystals clicking softly together, mimicking the rhythm of rain. The pumps roared again somewhere far below, and the floor shuddered under her. She followed the sound, down a narrow corridor marked employees only. She found a metal staircase winding downward, the same she'd glimpsed during her last visit before fleeing in fear. But now, with daylight faintly filtering through broken vents, it didn't feel as impossible. It felt necessary. She began her descent. The steps groaned under her weight, slick with residue and decay. The deeper she went, the stronger the smell of oil and seawater became. Walls glistened with condensation, their surface pocked and cracked. Somewhere below, a steady dripping echoed, rhythmic, almost deliberate, like a clock counting down. By the time she reached the bottom, the light from above was gone. Only her flashlight remained, cutting through the dark in narrow beams. The air was so cold it bit at her throat. The corridor opened into a massive chamber she hadn't seen before, the lower decks, as the old blueprints had called them. The water here was still receding, thin streams trickling away through grates and cracks in the floor. The room stretched far beyond what her light could reach, its ceiling low, supported by marble pillars that disappeared into the gloom. Rows of tables lay overturned, chips scattered like bones, and then she saw the murals again, larger this time, spanning the entire wall. These were different, not gamblers, not kings, but a story. In the first panel, the sea was calm, the casino radiant above it. In the second, the tide rose a storm depicted with wild, frantic strokes. The third showed men carrying chests into the depths beneath the casino, a hidden vault, marked with the same crown sigil, and the final panel. It made her chest tighten. The final panel showed the same vault, but the figures surrounding it weren't human anymore. Their faces had twisted, mouths open in silent screams as the water rose to claim them. Her uncle's warning echoed in her mind. Be warned, the tide keeps its own debts. Something metallic glinted near the far end of the chamber. She approached cautiously, sweeping her light over a rusted doorframe. Beyond it lay another hall, narrower, deeper, descending further into darkness. At the threshold, a faded plaque read, "Sub-level, vault access." Lena's pulse quickened. This was at the heart of the mystery. She entered, the air thickening with each step. The floor beneath her sloped downward, slick with algae. Water still dripped from overhead pipes, falling into puddles that shimmered faintly in her light. Her reflection stared back at her, distorted, ghostly, almost accusing. Finally she reached it, the vault. Even half, seen through the fog of condensation and decay, it commanded the space like a god. A towering door of blackened steel, adorned with carvings so intricate they almost seemed alive. The crown emblem at its center caught the light, gleaming faintly untouched by rust. Her breath misted in the cold. The air here was different, heavier, charged, the kind of silence that felt like it was listening. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the engraved surface. The metal was slick and strangely warm, pulsing faintly beneath her skin, as if responding to her presence. Then she noticed something she hadn't before, a faint seam running around the vault door, and beside it, a small keyhole carved into the shape of a wave. She crouched, examining it. The edges were sharp, unweathered, like it had been waiting for someone to find it. Her hand trembled as she reached into her pocket. Inside was the letter. She unfolded it, reading the last line once more. "Claim what's yours before the sea does." She turned the envelope over, and there, pressed into the wax seal, was a small metallic shape embedded within the paper. Her heart skipped. Carefully she peeled it away. It wasn't decoration. It was a key, old bronze, shaped like a curling wave crowned by a faint gold etching. It matched the keyhole perfectly. Her breath caught. She hesitated, staring at the vault. Something deep in her instincts screamed to stop, that once she turned that key, there'd be no turning back. But another voice whispered louder, the voice of every unpaid bill, every lost dream, every night she'd spent wondering if life had forgotten her. This was her chance to take control, to claim something that finally belonged to her. She lifted the key, slid it into the lock, and froze. A sound rippled through the chamber, soft at first, like water moving against glass. Then louder, stronger. The entire floor trembled. The pumps roared again far below, their rhythm turning frantic. She yanked her hand back, stumbling a step. The key was still in the lock, vibrating faintly. And then a deep, hollow boom. The vault exhaled. This time she felt it, a rush of air pushing outward, carrying with it the stench of salt and age. The metal surface shuddered, droplets sliding down in perfect unison, as if something behind it had just awakened. Lena staggered back, flashlight flickering in her shaking hand. Her reflection in the steel twisted, bending as though the door itself were breathing. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're not supposed to move." But the vault did move just slightly, a pulse, like a heartbeat echoing from deep inside. She turned and fled up the corridor, her footsteps splashing through shallow water, the walls closing in on either side. Above her, the casino groaned like a living thing. When she finally reached the upper level, she collapsed against a column, gasping for air. Her flashlight clattered to the ground, spinning light across the floor. The pumps had fallen silent again. The sea outside was unnaturally still, and far below, beneath the ballroom and the murals and the marble, the vault waited breathing in the dark. As the wind howled through shattered glass and distant thunder rolled over the water, Lena realized she had crossed a line she could never step back over. Whatever slept beneath the tide was awake now, and it knew her name. The storm returned that night, roaring across Silverstrand with the violence of something ancient reclaiming what had been disturbed. Rain lashed against the motel windows, waves hammered the docks, and the wind screamed through the cracks like a voice trying to be heard. But inside room 3, Lena sat awake, still wearing her damp clothes, the small bronze key clutched in her hand. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it again, the vault breathing beneath the tide. That sound wasn't mechanical, it wasn't natural, it was something alive, something aware. Lightning flared outside, painting the room in quicksilver light. For an instant, her reflection in the window wasn't alone. She swore she saw another face, faint, blurred, watching her from behind the glass. When the thunder broke, the image was gone. She stood abruptly, heart pounding. The key glimmered in her palm, the gold etching catching the light as if mocking her. She could still feel the warmth of the vault through it. Her phone sat on the nightstand, and its cracked screen showing a single unread email she'd ignored for weeks. Final notice, foreclosure imminent. The words felt almost laughable now. How could she think of foreclosure when she was holding a key to something buried beneath the sea? She whispered to herself, "You started this, you finish it." By dawn, the storm had faded. The streets of Silverstrand were slick with salt water and fallen branches. The clouds had torn open just enough to reveal a thin stripe of morning light. Lena drove toward the shoreline, her headlights cutting through mist that hung like breath over the water. The air smelled of iron and decay. The pumps, those ancient, unseen veins beneath the casino, had continued through the night. She could hear them humming even from the road. The tide was lower still. When she reached the site, the King's Tide stood taller than before. What was once buried under waves now loomed in eerie detailed terraces of black marble, cracked arches, stairways winding into silence. The sea had peeled back its curtain, exposing the casino's true face. She parked and stepped out, clutching her flashlight. The sand was littered with shells, coins, and glass shards. Some of the coins were so old they were barely recognizable, the metal pitted and worn, but still stamped with that same crown symbol. She pocketed one instinctively, feeling its cold weight against her skin. As she crossed the entrance, the casino greeted her with a long, hollow echo. Drips of water fell in steady rhythm. The air was heavier now, still thick with salt, but also something else, an energy, a pulse that seemed to move with her heartbeat. She descended the same staircase as before, now more exposed. What had been underwater yesterday was revealed in detail. Mosaic tiles depicting waves, dice, and faces of smiling kings. Yet, in the flicker of her light, she saw how those faces had been changed, warped and stretched, as if painted by a hand trembling in fear. The lower levels were no longer fully submerged. Pools of dark water lingered in corners, reflecting the ceiling like sheets of obsidian. The murals along the walls seemed to have come alive with color, the salt crystals glimmering like scales. When she reached the sub-level corridor again, her breath fogged the air. The pumps still murmured deep below. She approached the vault chamber cautiously, her flashlight beam trembling across the slick floor. The vault door awaited her, massive, cold, impossibly still, but something was different. The condensation that once dripped from its surface had dried, leaving streaks like veins across the metal. And there, at the edge of the door, the keyhole she had found before was gone, vanished. She blinked, kneeling to inspect the surface. It wasn't covered or broken, it had simply sealed itself shut, leaving only smooth steel where it once had been. She pressed her palm against it. It was cold now, no longer pulsing, no longer breathing. "What are you?" she whispered. The sound of her voice vanished into the dark. Then, faintly, a noise, not from behind the door, from above. She looked up, scanning the shadows. Drops of water fell steadily from the ceiling, but in their rhythm she heard something else. A soft, dragging sound, a shuffle of footsteps. Her heart hammered. Is someone there? Silence. Then the faintest whisper, carried on the damp air. A voice, distant but human. "Leave it be." The beam of her flashlight darted through the chamber. Nothing. Only pillars, shadows, and water rippling in still pools. Her skin prickled. She wanted to turn back, to flee up the stairs and forget she'd ever come. But the same pull that had brought her here, that strange gravity of unfinished truth, anchored her in place. She stepped closer to the vault again. This time, she noticed something new. At its base, near the floor, the water was swirling slowly, circling in an impossible pattern, clockwise, then counter, over and over. The floor itself vibrated beneath her. She crouched, shining her light over it. What she saw made her breath catch. There was another symbol etched there, one she hadn't noticed before, a spiral with a crown at its center. As the water spun, the symbol began to glow faintly, gold lines emerging from beneath years of grime. And then the air shifted. A low rumble built from deep within the floor. The sound grew louder, vibrating through her bones. Water surged upward, splashing her face. The vault groaned. She stumbled back as the carvings along its surface lit one by one, gold and red intertwining like veins awakening after a long sleep. "No, no, no," she whispered, backing away. The pumps screamed beneath her feet, the walls shuddering as old pipes burst open. A cascade of water poured from the ceiling, flooding the chamber again. The vault began to hum, a sound like a heartbeat magnified 1,000 times. Through the chaos, she heard it again, that voice, closer now, stronger. "You can't drain what the sea owns." Her flashlight flickered, then went out completely. She plunged into darkness. For a few seconds, only the sound of water roared around her. Then, through the pitch black, a glow appeared, faint and blue, emanating from the base of the vault. It pulsed rhythmically, casting eerie ripples across the ceiling. Her instincts screamed to run, but her body wouldn't move. She stood frozen, hypnotized by the light. Then the door shifted, just slightly, a tremor, a breath, a single long exhale that pushed air against her face. The glow dimmed, then flared brighter, illuminating the entire chamber in cold, ghostly light. In that moment, Lena saw everything, the water rising, the murals shifting on the walls, the painted faces turning, watching her. The reflection of her own figure warped across the steel, multiplied into dozens of silhouettes that weren't hers. And then silence. The hum ceased, the light faded, the water stilled. She was alone again. Her knees nearly gave out. She pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself, gasping for air. The vault was motionless once more, its carvings dark, lifeless. Whatever had happened, it was over. But she knew what she had felt. The vault had responded to her. It had reacted. She turned and stumbled back toward the staircase, soaked and trembling. As she climbed, the sound of water followed her, soft at first, then louder. A slow trickle that became a steady pour. When she emerged into the upper lobby, she froze. The casino floor, the marble tiles, the velvet stairs, even the chandeliers was beginning to shift. Water was leaking upward from beneath the cracks, spreading across the surface like veins. The pumps below were failing. The sea was returning. Lena backed toward the exit, every instinct screaming at her to leave before the tide swallowed the place again. As she reached the doorway, she glanced back one last time. Through the rising mist, the reflection of the vault flickered in the shallow water, a faint gold shimmer that looked almost like an eye opening. Outside, the sky had turned pale and bruised. Thunder rumbled far away, the sound swallowed by wind. She stood on the causeway, soaked, breathless, watching as the sea began to reclaim the ruins. Behind her, the casino moaned like something alive, and in her pocket, the bronze key, once dull and lifeless, now burned faintly warm against her skin. As she stared at the horizon, a single thought echoed in her mind, relentless and cold. The tide doesn't take without reason. It takes what is owed. And deep beneath the waves, the King's Tide Casino waited, its vault alive, its secret stirring as the sea prepared to settle its debt. The storm passed, but it left behind a silence that felt heavier than thunder. Morning came pale and cold, painting the coast in dull silver. Lena stood on the shoreline, the hem of her jeans soaked, her gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of the King's Tide Casino, now Hafim, urged from the ocean like a wound reopened. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard it, the heartbeat of the vault, that low, patient rhythm thudding deep beneath the waves, calling to her like something alive. The bronze key still rested in her coat pocket, faintly warm against her thigh, pulsing once every so often as if syncing with her own heart. Silverstrand had started to notice her. When she walked into the local diner that morning, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The few patrons, fishermen, dockhands, an old couple by the window, stared at her the way people stare at storms they've seen before. She tried to smile, but no one smiled back. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a cigarette voice, approached cautiously. "You're not from here," she said softly, placing down a cup of coffee before Lena could even ask. "No, just passing through." The woman looked toward the misty coastline. "Nobody passes through Silverstrand. They either leave or get stuck." Lena forced a small laugh. "Maybe I'm both." The waitress's eyes flicked to the bronze keychain on Lena's table, the crown insignia glinting faintly. "That symbol," she said quietly. "Where did you get it?" Lena hesitated. "It belonged to my uncle, Ezra Carter." The woman froze. The chatter in the diner stopped completely. From the corner, one of the fishermen spat into his napkin. "That name doesn't belong here anymore," he muttered. Lena frowned. "Why? What happened to him?" The waitress shifted uncomfortably, her gaze distant. You should talk to Roy. He used to work the docks back when the King's Tide still floated. Lives out by the cliffs now, near the old lighthouse. If anyone remembers the truth, it's him. The truth about what? She didn't answer. She only said, "Be careful, honey. Some tides don't like being disturbed." Lena left cash on the table, though the waitress didn't take it. Outside, the wind had picked up again, sharp with the scent of seaweed and iron. She pulled her coat tighter and drove toward the cliffs. The road was narrow, winding along the edge of the sea. The lighthouse came into view, a crooked tower of white stone, half covered in moss, the lantern dark and silent. A small shack leaned against it, smoke rising faintly from its chimney. She parked, stepped out, and walked toward it. The man who opened the door was built like the ocean, weathered, solid, and unpredictable. His face was a map of scars, his eyes pale and sharp. "You must be Carter's kin," he said, not asking, just knowing. "I am," Lena replied. "You're Roy?" He nodded. "Been expecting you." That chilled her. "Expecting me?" He turned and motioned for her to follow. Inside, the shack smelled of salt, oil, and old wood. Maps of the coastline covered the walls, each marked with red ink circles around the bay, the casino's position at the center. Roy poured 2 mugs of coffee, then sat across from her. "You stirred something you shouldn't have," he said plainly. "I felt it last night. The tide shifted wrong. I activated the drainage system," she admitted. "I think it's working. The casino's almost exposed now." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think draining it will save you? That place doesn't want to be found. It's been swallowing its secrets for 50 years. Lena leaned forward. "What happened there, Roy? What really happened?" He stared into his mug for a long time before answering. "Your uncle wasn't just some businessman. Ezra Carter built the King's Tide on promises he couldn't keep and on debts he never planned to repay. The casino wasn't just built on the bay. It was built with it. He made a pact, not superstition, not rumor, a real one." Lena's skin prickled. "A pact?" Roy nodded slowly. "Back then, Silverstrand was dying. The fishing industry was gone, people starving. Ezra showed up with money no one could trace and said he'd bring prosperity back, and he did for a while. Every night, the King's Tide overflowed with light, laughter, gold. People said the ocean itself shimmered brighter when his doors opened. What was the catch? He met her gaze. The catch was the same as it always is: fortune doesn't come free. The sea gave him what he wanted and took what it was owed. Every storm, every shipwreck, every missing soul after 1958. They say the King's Tide claimed them." Lena shook her head. "You can't really believe that?" Roy leaned forward. "You were there, weren't you? You heard it, the breathing." Her blood turned to ice. He saw it in her face. "Then you already know it's alive. The vault beneath that casino, that's not just a room full of gold. It's where Ezra stored the debt. You drain it, you set it free." Lena swallowed hard. "Then why leave it to me?" Roy gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe because he knew you wouldn't be scared enough to walk away." Outside, the wind howled across the cliffs, carrying the sound of waves smashing against the rocks below. Lena stood, her pulse hammering. "If you're right, then whatever's down there already knows you're coming." Roy finished. He reached for a drawer and pulled something out, a small, tarnished coin. He slid it across the table toward her. The coin was stamped with the crown symbol, but this one had something new, a thin crack running through it, and what looked like dried salt crusted in the groove. "That washed up the morning after the casino went under," he said. "Every year since, one more like it shows up. Each one's a debt marker, a soul the tide took." Lena turned it over in her hand. It felt heavier than it should. Roy stood and walked to the window, staring out at the horizon. "If you're set on finishing what he started, do it fast. The sea's changing again. I can
You
feel
remind
it.
me so much of
She
her,
pocketed the coin.
the
I'm
way you
not
look at the
running.
world,
He looked
with
back
that
at her,
same quiet
eyes
wonder.
narrowing with something between pity and respect. Then remember this, girl, the tide doesn't just rise. It returns. The drive back felt endless. The fog was thicker now, rolling over the cliffs in great, silent waves. When she reached the outskirts of town, the streets were deserted. Even the gulls were gone. She parked by the shore again, staring at the distant casino, glowing faintly under the bruised sky. The pumps had stopped. She could feel the absence of their hum, like a heart that had ceased beating. The sea was unnaturally calm, too calm. She stood there for a long time, the coin and the key both heavy in her pockets. Behind her, the wind carried faint whispers, not words, but something like memory, and for the first time, she wondered if Roy was right. Maybe she wasn't uncovering something lost. Maybe she was answering a call that had never stopped. As the first drops of rain began to fall, she looked toward the king's tide and whispered, "You can haunt me all you want. I'm still coming." The waves lapped at her feet like a quiet warning, soft, rhythmic and alive. And somewhere beneath the grey horizon, the ocean exhaled slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging her promise. Lena turned back toward her car, not knowing that by the next night, the sea would begin to whisper her name. The rain came again at dusk, softer this time, more like a mist that clung to the skin than a storm. The town of Silverstrand lay drowned in grey silence. Lights glimmered faintly in shuttered windows, and the wind carried the faintest echo of music from somewhere far down the coast. Old record player caught in a loop, the tune half forgotten. Lena sat in her car at the edge of the pier, engine idling, staring out at the horizon where the casino's roof breached the tide like the spine of a sleeping beast. Roy's words replayed in her mind over and over. "You drain it, you set it free." She didn't want to believe him, but the silence of the ocean, that patient, listening silence, made her wonder if he hadn't just been warning her. Maybe he'd been preparing her. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. "You're not the first to try. Leave it." Her pulse jumped. She looked around the empty parking lot, the surrounding fog swallowing every shape. The message disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving only the faint reflection of her own face in the screen. She turned off the engine. The world fell quiet again, save for the slow hiss of rain. Something shifted near the shoreline, a movement too deliberate to be wind. A figure stood at the edge of the water, motionless, facing the sea. At first, she thought it was Roy, but as she stepped out of the car, she realized it wasn't. It was a woman. Her dress clung to her skin, hair streaming like black ribbons across her shoulders. She didn't turn when Lena called out, "Hey, are you all right?" No response. Lena took a few hesitant steps forward. The air around the woman shimmered faintly like heat rising from asphalt, except colder, denser. "Ma'am?" The woman finally turned her head, slowly, too slowly, and where her eyes should have been, there was nothing but dark water streaming down her cheeks. Lena froze. A chill like ice slid through her chest. The woman opened her mouth, but no sound came out, only the gurgling whisper of water. Then she lifted her hand and pointed toward the casino. The next flash of lightning came, and the figure was gone. Only the tide remained, rippling as if disturbed. Lena stumbled back toward the car, slamming the door, her breath coming fast and uneven. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. For a long moment she just sat there, staring at the empty shoreline. She wasn't losing her mind. She couldn't be. She drove back toward town, the windshield streaked with rain, wipers fighting to keep up. The roads were nearly empty. When she passed the diner, its lights were off. The open sign flickered once and died. She pressed harder on the gas, as if distance could keep the vision from following her. But when she reached the motel and stepped into her room, The silence waiting for her felt wrong, too deep, too aware. The key she'd left on the nightstand, and was gone. Panic surged through her. She tore through the room, under the bed, inside drawers, behind the curtain. Nothing. Then she saw it. The bathroom light was on. And there, in the small porcelain sink, the bronze key lay gleaming under the flickering bulb, dripping wet. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The metal was freezing, slick with salt water, but she hadn't been near the sea since she'd left the pier. A single droplet fell from the key and hit the sink with a faint plink. Then another, and another. The sound became rhythmic, too steady, too measured. She looked up at the mirror. Reflection behind her wasn't hers. For a fraction of a second, she saw the same water-eyed woman standing just over her shoulder, her lips moving soundlessly. Then the light flickered and she was gone, leaving only Lena's pale, trembling face. Lena backed away, clutching the key so tightly it dug into her palm. The sting grounded her, a reminder she was still real, still alive. She stepped outside into the rain, desperate for air. The parking lot was empty, the mist rolling thick and low. But out beyond the road, she could hear it, faint voices rising and falling, layered like echoes. Not screams, not laughter, just whispers. She followed the sound, drawn as if by instinct, down to the edge of town where the docks met the marsh. The old buildings leaned inward, their windows black, their foundations creaking in the shifting tide. At the far end of the pier, lantern light flickered. A small group of locals stood gathered around a fire barrel, the same fishermen she'd seen at the diner earlier. Their faces turned when she approached, eyes shadowed beneath wet hats. One of them, the oldest, with a grey beard and a coat that looked older than the town itself, spoke first. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Carter. How do you know who I am?" she asked, voice shaking. He spat into the water. "Everyone knows, the sea knows too." Another man, younger but with the same haunted eyes, added, "It's already started." "You opened the pumps, you woke it." "I didn't open anything," she snapped. "The vault's still sealed." The old man shook his head. "You don't need to open a door for what's already inside to walk out. You just need to remind it there's air above the water again." A gust of wind swept through, scattering ashes from the fire. One of the men stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "There are names written on the pillars below the ballroom. The workers who never came back after the flood. When the tide fell last night, some of those names washed clean." Lena frowned. "What does that mean?" The old man looked past her toward the sea. "It means they're walking again." The group dispersed without another word, leaving her alone by the dying fire. The rain hissed as it hit the coals, turning them to smoke. She stood there until the last ember faded, then turned toward the shore. Far out at the edge of the mist, the casino lights flickered, faint, intermittent, like a heartbeat seen through fog. The key burned in her hand, pulsing once, twice, then it stopped. Lena whispered, "What do you want from me?" The sea answered not with sound, but movement. The tide surged suddenly, a single wave crashing higher than the rest, spraying salt into her face. When it receded, something lay at her feet. She looked down, a coin, identical to the one Roy had given her, cracked through the middle, glistening wet. She picked it up. The moment her skin touched the metal, the sound returned, the whispers, louder now, wrapping around her like a current. The debt must be paid. Her heart lurched. She threw the coin back into the sea, but the sound didn't stop. It rose instead, the wind joining it, the water echoing it, until the whole bay seemed to speak with one voice. The debt must be paid. And then silence. The storm broke without warning, the rain vanishing as quickly as it had come. The sky cleared, revealing a thin sliver of moonlight cutting across the waves. The casino stood in full view again, not a ruin now, but something more. Its reflection shimmered perfectly across the surface, as if restored. The neon letters on its sign flickered faintly to life. spelling words the world hadn't seen in half a century. King's Tide fortune awaits. Lena's breath caught. The letters burned gold for one brief, impossible second, then went dark again. She stood rooted in place, soaked and trembling, watching the horizon where water met ruin. The ghosts of Silverstrand had spoken, and they had chosen her to listen. As she turned back toward her car, the key pulsed again, faint but steady, and far below, beneath the waves and the sleeping marble floors, the vault gave a single, hollow sigh, as if something inside had just remembered it was not yet done breathing. Morning came with a low golden light that felt borrowed rather than earned. The tide had withdrawn farther still, leaving the casino fully revealed for the first time in 50 years. From the cliffs above, it looked almost magnificent its once submerged domes gleaming with damp sheen, salt water still dripping from balconies like tears. The King's Tide was no longer a ghost beneath the sea. It was a cathedral of ruin rising to breathe again. Lena stood on the overlook road, the wind tangling her hair, the bronze key heavy in her pocket. Behind her, the town of Silverstrand still slept, its windows shuttered, its people pretending nothing miraculous or monstrous had occurred. But down at the bay, cranes and work trucks were already gathering. Word had spread. She'd done it. She'd woken the dead building. The roar of the pumps had become constant now, echoing from under the earth like the heartbeat of something vast. The draining had accelerated overnight, exposing staircases, terraces, even the lower ballroom that had been trapped in darkness for decades. It was a spectacle the news should have captured, but no camera crews had come. No one wanted proof. Silverstrand was a place that lived off rumor and regret. Lena had hired 3 locals to help men who'd been too desperate or too drunk to believe the stories. They worked quietly, setting up floodlights along the outer promenade, the glare cutting through mist like artificial dawn. The marble glimmered under the beams, streaked with salt and coral. As she walked through the grand lobby, boots echoing across drying stone, she could feel the building exhale. Air moved through it in slow drafts, carrying the scent of iron and old perfume. Every chandelier tinkled faintly, still dripping from their long submersion. Sunlight poured through the fractured dome above, scattering across the flooded floor in a kaleidoscope of gold and blue. It was heartbreakingly beautiful, a glimpse of a world that had drowned trying to stay perfect. One of the workers, a young man named Mason, whistled low as he followed behind her. "Never thought I'd see it out of the water," he said. "It's like Atlantis crawled home." Lena smiled faintly. "Let's hope it stays home." He laughed, but the sound didn't linger. The walls seemed to absorb it. They made their way toward the central hall, the grand ballroom that once hosted 1,000 gamblers, musicians, and dreamers. Now it stood stripped bare, its opulence reduced to pale ghost light. The tiled floor, still slick with moisture, shimmered beneath the floodlamps. In the center of the room, carved into the marble itself, was a sprawling design, the same spiraling crown she'd seen before, only now completely visible. It stretched 20 feet across, its lines etched deep and precise, leading toward the space directly above the vault below. The workers paused, staring. "What is that?" Mason asked. Lena knelt, tracing the pattern with her fingers. "A marker," she murmured, "or a warning." The grooves were filled with sediment, but beneath it glinted faint gold. It wasn't paint, it was metal, fused into the stone itself. She followed the spiral inward, feeling the faintest warmth radiate up through her hand. "Feels alive," Mason muttered. "You sure this place is safe?" She looked up at him. "No," he half laughed, half grimaced, rubbing the back of his neck. "You pay good enough, I'll pretend it is." The other 2 men brothers, both older, both sunburned and quiet, had begun hauling debris toward the upper stairwell. One of them stopped suddenly, squinting at a pillar. "Hey, boss," he called. "You see this?" Lena walked over. The marble column he pointed to was covered in faint engravings, shapes she'd mistaken for cracks at first. But up close, they were deliberate, symbols, dozens of them, the same crown motif repeated again and again, surrounded by what looked like waves, coins, and names, carved in a spiral running up the column's length. Names she recognized from Roy's warning, the workers who never came back. Her throat tightened. Their memorials, she whispered. Mason frowned, or headstones. The wind shifted. Somewhere deep below, the pumps groaned louder. A tremor passed underfoot, soft but noticeable. The chandeliers swayed. Lena straightened. "We need to stabilize the lower level before we go any further." Meaning if we're standing over the vault, and it decides to breathe again, we'll all end up part of its history. The men exchanged uneasy looks. Outside, the ocean glimmered a pale silver. The tide line was receding farther each hour, leaving behind streaks of salt foam that looked almost deliberate, like runes carved by water itself. By midday, sunlight reached the lowest terraces. The water that had once drowned the main stairwell was gone, leaving behind mosaics depicting kings and dice and golden crowns, the same imagery repeated everywhere, as if the casino itself worshipped luck like a god. Lena stood at the base of the grand staircase, staring upward at the faded ceiling mural. A massive depiction of a crowned figure rising from the sea, arms outstretched toward the stars. Around him, people reached up from the waves, begging for his touch. The king's tide, her uncle's empire, and his curse. Mason joined her side. "Place gives me chills," he said quietly, "like it's waiting for someone to start the music again." Maybe it is. A gull screamed outside, sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness. The sound echoed strangely, not just from the open air, but from somewhere below. Lena turned. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah." Mason frowned. "Thought it came from the docks?" But she was already moving, following the echo back through the corridor that led to the maintenance stairwell. The lower levels were still damp, half in shadow. Her flashlight beams swept across the walls, glinting off brass fixtures and algae-streaked tile. At the bottom of the stairwell, she found the source of the noise, a door she hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a fallen cabinet. The metal plate read, "Subfloor Drainage Control." The door stood slightly ajar. "Mason," she called, "grab a light." He joined her, holding a portable flood lamp. Together they pushed the door open. The room beyond was narrow, lined with rusted machinery and broken gauges. Water dripped steadily from overhead pipes. A faint humming sound filled the space, not mechanical, but harmonic, like a low note vibrating through the air. At the far wall, she saw it, a small bronze wheel attached to a valve, cleaner than anything else in the room. It looked new. "What the hell?" Mason murmured. Lena stepped closer. The wheel bore the same crown emblem. Around it, fresh etchings cut into the metal spelled out words she hadn't seen before. "Turn to rise." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't here before. Mason frowned. "You sure?" Maybe it was buried under. The light flickered. He stopped mid-sentence. The humming grew louder. Somewhere beyond the wall, deep within the casino's foundation, something stirred, a rumble that vibrated through the floor, soft but growing. The sound wasn't just below them, it was around them, as if the entire structure had taken a breath. Lena grabbed the valve instinctively, steadying it. "Kill the pumps," she shouted, but Mason was already backing away. The lights above burst one by one, showering sparks. Then, from somewhere beneath their feet, a low grinding began, stone against stone, iron against pressure. The floor itself was moving. "Jesus Christ," Mason whispered. Lena stared in awe. The tiled ground of the ballroom above began to shift upward in slow, deliberate motion. Water cascaded down the edges, running off like rain on a rising island. The ballroom was lifting. The very floor, the one carved with the spiraling crown, was rising from the depths, dragging with it the long, sealed layer below. The sound was deafening, gears screaming, walls groaning, waves crashing against the exterior like applause. The pumps whined in protest, and then silence. When it stopped, Lena could hear only her breathing. She ran up the stairwell, Mason close behind. The moment she reached the top, she froze. The ballroom's floor had risen several feet, revealing a wide seam running along its base. From within, faint air hissed outward, the same sound she'd heard before near the vault. Something had awakened beneath. Lena stepped closer, heart hammering. The golden spiral that once lay flat now glowed faintly under the new light, its edges shimmering with wet luminescence. Mason whispered, "What did you do?" Lena didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she knew was that the sea was watching its reflection trembling in the broken glass of the windows, and the king's tide had just taken its first breath of daylight in half a century. As thunder rumbled somewhere far beyond the horizon, Lena whispered, almost to herself, "The house always rises before it falls." And beneath the golden spiral, faint and muffled, came the echo of something moving slow, deliberate, waiting. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence that followed the rising floor felt sacred, the kind of silence that belonged to cathedrals and graves. Water still streamed down the edges of the lifted platform, catching light from the work lamps and scattering it into glimmers across the marble walls. The golden spiral in the center of the ballroom now glowed with a subdued heartbeat, a pulse that rose from the stone itself. Mason took a slow step backward, muttering under his breath, "That ain't natural, floors don't just wake up." Lena couldn't take her eyes off it. Her reflection rippled in the wet marble, fractured and strange, as though she were standing inside a living mirror. "It's not the floor," she whispered. "It's what's beneath it." The two brothers who had been hauling debris earlier returned from the upper terrace, faces pale when they saw what had happened. "The hell did you do?" one of them asked. Lena didn't answer. She moved closer, kneeling near the edge of the platform where the seam had opened. A faint draft of air escaped from below, cold, damp, metallic. The scent of rust and seaweed clung to it, but underneath there was something else, something faintly sweet. Like old perfume trapped in stone, she reached down, running her fingers along the groove. The vibrations traveled through her skin, rhythmic, steady, almost like a heartbeat. "It's hollow," she said. Mason crouched beside her, flashlight shaking slightly. "You think there's another chamber?" "I think there's a lot more than that." One of the brothers, irritated and uneasy, crossed himself and muttered, "You people don't learn. My father used to tell stories about this place. Said it was cursed from the foundation up. Said the builders disappeared before the grand opening. You start prying into it, you'll end up part of the walls." Lena stood, turning to face him. "You can leave anytime. I won't stop you." But he didn't move. None of them did. Because curiosity was stronger than fear, and whatever lay beneath that floor, it called to all of them. By midday, they had set up the portable winches and cables, trying to wedge the seam open further. The pumps continued their distant hum, vibrating through the metal like a heartbeat that never quite stopped. Outside, the sea was glass, flat, unnaturally calm. Even the gulls were gone. Every few minutes, Lena caught herself glancing at the horizon, half expecting the water to start rising again. But it didn't. It only waited, patient, still, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Mason climbed onto the platform, tapping the surface with a crowbar. "Solid steel under here," he said. "If there's a chamber, it's sealed tight." "Try the corner by the west pillar," Lena suggested. "The air current's stronger there." He nodded and moved toward it. The other men watched as he wedged the crowbar into the smallest crack he could find and leaned his weight into it. The metal groaned. For a moment it resisted. Then it shifted just slightly with a sound that was more like a sigh than a snap. Air rushed up through the gap, spraying mist across the floor. It was colder now, thick with the scent of brine and age. The lights flickered. Jesus, Mason muttered, stepping back. It's breathing again. Lena stared, heart pounding. The air wasn't just moving, it was exhaling in slow, measured intervals, as though the chamber below was a lung remembering how to function. A sound followed, faint but distinct, a deep metallic rhythm that could have been machinery, or could have been something else. One of the brothers whispered, "Let's get out of here." But Lena barely heard him. Her focus was fixed on the gap. She knelt again, shining her flashlight inside. The beam cut through dust and condensation, revealing glimpses of wet steel and intricate carvings etched into the surface below, lines forming shapes too complex to make sense of. Then something moved in the darkness below, a ripple, subtle but real, like water, shifting around something that wasn't water. She jerked back, dropping the light. It clattered across the marble and rolled into the puddles, its beam spinning wildly. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance. "What was that?" Mason hissed. "I don't know," she said, but her voice betrayed her disbelief. The brothers grabbed their gear. "We're done," one said sharply. "You want to dig up ghosts, go ahead, but I ain't dying for your inheritance." They left fast, their boots splashing through the corridor until their footsteps vanished up the stairs. Lena didn't chase them. She couldn't. Her body felt frozen between awe and fear. She and Mason were alone now, the hum of machinery and the whisper of the sea, the only sounds remaining. Mason exhaled shakily. "So, what now?" Lena wiped the water from her hands, her mind racing. "We need to document this. Every symbol, every sound. Something's happening here, it's connected to the vault. I can feel it, lady. I can hear it, and I don't think it wants you messing with it." But Lena wasn't listening. She retrieved the dropped flashlight and peered again into the seam. This time she noticed something new, faint streaks of light beneath the floor. Not electric, not from her lamp. They glowed with their own rhythm, deep amber and gold, pulsing like veins through metal. The light traveled in lines flowing from the spiral's center toward the outer edges of the ballroom. As she watched, it began to spread, crawling up the marble pillars where the workers' names were carved. Each name flickered in gold for a brief, breathtaking second. Mason swore under his breath. "What the hell is this?" Lena whispered, "There," lighting up. Every name on the pillar shimmered, one after another, 50 in total, before fading back into stillness. When the last one dimmed, the hum below deepened. The pumps roared louder. A tremor shook the casino, stronger this time. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the chandeliers above began to sway in unison, their crystals clicking together in eerie rhythm. Lena grabbed Mason's arm. "Shut it down, the pumps go." He bolted toward the stairwell, but before he reached it, a sound stopped them both. A voice, faint, distant, rising from below the floor, not one voice, many, whispering together in overlapping tones, like the echo of gamblers murmuring across an endless room. Lena's blood ran cold. The sound grew clearer, words bleeding through the noise. "Debt, taken, balance, kept." Mason stumbled back. "Tell me you hear that." She could barely breathe. "I hear it." The air thickened. A low vibration passed through the walls, shaking dust from every corner. The gold lines pulsed faster, synchronizing with the whispers. Then silence. Everything stopped. The hum, the light, even the movement of air. For a single terrifying moment, the entire casino seemed to hold its breath, and then came the scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't mechanical. It was both a sound that seemed to tear through water and metal alike, vibrating through their bones. The chandeliers shattered, raining glass across the marble floor. Lena and Mason dove for cover. The light went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything. She could hear him breathing nearby, ragged, terrified. "We need to get out." He gasped. Lena reached for him in the dark, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "Stay close." A splash cut her off, then silence. "Mason?" No answer. She turned the flashlight back on, its weak beam slicing through the pitch black haze. The space beside her was empty, only ripples moving across the shallow puddles where he'd been standing. Her pulse thundered. "Mason?" The only reply was the faint gurgle of water seeping from the crack below. She stumbled backward toward the staircase, slipping on wet marble. Her hand brushed the pillar again. One of the names carved there now glowed faintly. It was new, Mason C. Her breath hitched. She ran. By the time she reached the upper floor, the tremors had stopped. The pumps had fallen silent once more. The casino stood still, the ballroom gleaming under fractured daylight. Lena collapsed near the window, gasping, soaked, shaking. The sea outside was calm again, too calm, like nothing had happened. She pressed a trembling hand to the glass, staring out at the horizon. "You took him," she whispered. The ocean shimmered faintly, the faintest ripple tracing the reflection of the king's tide across the water. And in that reflection, just for an instant, she saw movement, the shadow of a man walking along the ballroom floor below the surface. Her chest tightened. She whispered, almost in prayer, "What are you?" The sea did not answer, but far below, beneath the marble and gold, the vault released one soft, deliberate breath, and a single coin floated upward through the crack, landing at her feet. It bore the same crown, the same mark, and on its back a name had been freshly etched into the metal. Mason. Lena's tears mixed with salt water as thunder rolled in the distance. The tide was turning again, and somewhere below the casino's rising floor the debt was still being paid. The morning after Mason vanished, the sea was still, too still. Not a single ripple touched the shore, not even the cry of a gull broke the silence. The world around Silverstrand had gone quiet, as if holding its breath with her. Lena stood at the casino's entrance, soaked in pale light that filtered through the mist. The tide had retreated even farther overnight, revealing the full skeleton of the king's tide, its marble terraces gleaming under a thin sheen of salt, its windows cracked and blind. For the first time, she could see the inscription carved above the doors. "Fortune favors the faithful." She stared at the words for a long moment, her breath clouding in the cold air. Faithful to what? To greed? To ghosts? Or to the sea that never forgot its debts? The bronze key burned faintly in her coat pocket. She hadn't slept. Her hands trembled not from cold but from exhaustion and fear, a fear that had turned quiet and heavy like the sea before a storm. Roy had been right. Whatever was buried beneath this place wasn't just money. It was alive. She walked through the grand doors. The scent of rust and decay greeted her like a memory. Inside, sunlight streamed through the shattered ceiling, reflecting off the pools of water that still clung to the marble floor. The chandeliers were gone, shattered overnight by whatever had screamed through the casino. Shards of crystal glimmered on the ground like frost. Lena stepped carefully across the ballroom, the soles of her boots echoing through the vast chamber. The golden spiral in the center had dimmed again, but faint warmth still pulsed. Beneath the surface, the seam around the rising floor had sealed itself shut during the night. No sign of the gap that had swallowed Mason. No blood, no body, no trace, only his name carved into the pillar. She approached it slowly. Mason C. The letters gleamed faintly, as though freshly etched by invisible hands. Her chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The air did not move. She turned away, gripping the flashlight tighter. She needed to see the vault again. Whatever had happened to Mason had come from below, from whatever stirred in that chamber. The only way to stop it was to face it. The stairwell leading down was slick with condensation, the air colder with every step. The deeper she descended, the more she felt it, that pressure in her chest, like she was moving underwater, though she could still breathe. When she reached the sublevel, she froze. The corridor that led to the vault was glowing. Not bright, faint, golden veins running along the walls, like liquid light, seeping through cracks in the stone. The carvings she'd once thought were cracks now pulsed rhythmically, as if the building itself had veins and a heartbeat. She followed the glow, one trembling step at a time, until the corridor opened into the vault chamber. It was waiting for her. The massive steel door towered at the far end, glistening with condensation, but the air was different. It was warmer now, breathing against her skin like a living thing. The sound of slow, rhythmic exhalation filled the space, soft, deliberate, patient. The vault was alive. Every few seconds it released a sigh, followed by a low hum that reverberated through the chamber walls. The crown insignia at its center pulsed faintly with light. Lena's hands trembled as she stepped forward. The last time she had touched that door, she had felt it respond. She had felt it know her. Ezra Carter. She whispered, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" The words vanished into the hum. She circled the vault, her light sweeping across the floor. The waterline had dropped several inches since her last visit, revealing the full curvature of the chamber. Along the edges were metal plaques, dozens of them, each engraved with a date and a name. She knelt to read one. July 2, 1958, Clara M. August 9, 1958, Thomas R. August 9, 1958, Ezra C. Her uncle's name. Her hand went cold. August 9. She whispered, the night it sank. Lightning flashed faintly through the cracks above, illuminating the chamber in white for an instant, and in that instant, she saw it. A shape behind the vault door. It wasn't clear, just a shifting silhouette, like something vast moving behind frosted glass. Her breath hitched. She stepped closer. The air grew thicker, the hum louder. "Mason," she whispered, half in hope, half in denial. The silhouette moved again, closer this time. The condensation on the steel vibrated as though responding to pressure from within. Then a sound, metal creaking under strain, water trickling from somewhere unseen. "Stop," she murmured, stepping back. "Please don't." A loud clang echoed through the chamber, sharp and final. The vault had moved. Only an inch, maybe less, but enough for her to see it wasn't sealed anymore. A thin line of darkness cut across the center, and from it, a single droplet of water fell, landing at her feet. It smelled like salt and old perfume. Then, faintly from behind the door, a voice, not words, not yet, just a murmur like someone trying to speak underwater. Lena stumbled back, eyes wide. No, no, no. The bronze key burned hot in her pocket. She pulled it out, the metal glowing faintly in dark. The same symbol, the wave crowned with gold, shone brighter with each pulse of the vault's breath. Her instinct screamed to throw it away, but her hand wouldn't obey. She felt it, a pull, magnetic, deep in her chest, the same gravity that had brought her here from the beginning. It wasn't greed, it wasn't curiosity, it was something older, something that had chosen her. Her reflection shimmered in the vault's surface. For a heartbeat, it wasn't hers. It was another woman, hair dripping, eyes hollow, her mouth whispering something Lena couldn't hear. Then it was gone. The hunt deepened. The vault exhaled again, longer, heavier. This time the sound carried a whisper. "The debt." Lena froze. It came again, louder. "The debt must breathe." She staggered back, tripping over a broken pipe. Her flashlight fell, its beam spinning wildly across the room, landing on the opposite wall. There, carved deep into the metal, were fresh words that hadn't been there before. "Do not open what owes the sea." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She snatched up the flashlight and ran. The corridor trembled as she fled, the hum chasing her like thunder underwater. The air was alive, vibrating with whispers, with breaths that weren't hers. When she reached the staircase, she stopped, gasping. Water was rising again, flowing upward from cracks, climbing the steps toward her boots. The pumps were running in reverse. She turned and bolted upward, slipping once, catching herself on the railing. Her lungs burned. Behind her, she could hear it, the vault door shifting, metal grinding against stone, releasing another exhale that shook the walls. By the time she reached the main level, the ballroom was trembling. The chandeliers, or what was left of them, rattled against their chains. The golden spiral on the floor had reignited, burning bright enough to reflect against the walls. She stumbled to the center, staring at the symbol glowing beneath her feet. It pulsed in rhythm with the vault's breaths. The sea outside had begun to churn again, its waves slamming against the marble terraces with violent precision. The air was charged, humming like an electrical storm. Lena dropped to her knees, clutching the key in both hands. "What do you want from me?" she cried. The floor answered with a low rumble, then silence. Everything stilled at once. The lights flickered out. The sea went quiet. The air itself seemed to vanish, and in that void, a single sound rose from below, a soft, almost tender whisper that carried through the stone like a sigh. "Open!" Me, the key in her hands turned hot, glowing gold. Lena looked toward the stairs that led down into the vault, and for the first time she wasn't sure if she was going down there out of courage, or because something below had already claimed her will. Outside, the tide surged higher, slapping against the walls of the resurrected casino. The sea was awake again, and beneath the ballroom floor, the vault breathed slow, patient, and hungry. Night crept back over Silverstrand like a tide of shadow. The storm had not yet returned, but the air smelled of it, ozone and salt, heavy and waiting. The casino loomed against the black horizon, its domes glistening wet under a bruised sky. The floodlights she'd left on earlier flickered sporadically, dim halos that barely reached the edges of the terraces. Lena stood in the upper ballroom, staring down at the golden spiral still pulsing faintly through the floor. Every beat of light seemed slower now, deeper, as if the building had slipped into a steady rhythm with her heart. She no longer knew if it was the floor responding to her pulse or her pulse responding to it. The sea outside whispered against the marble steps, each wave a measured breath. Somewhere in that sound, beneath the soft hush of water, she could hear it again, that low hum rising from the vault below, the same rhythm that had taken Mason. She wanted to run, she wanted to leave Silverstrand and never look back, but every time she turned toward the doors, something in her stopped her, an invisible thread tugging her back toward the depths. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was compulsion. She took the key from her pocket. The metal shimmered faintly in the dark, its surface warm against her palm. A few drops of seawater glistened along its edge, though she hadn't been near the water since morning. The key had been waiting. Lena whispered into the emptiness, "You called me here. You wanted me." But no answer came, only the steady pulse beneath her feet. She drew in a shaky breath and turned toward the stairwell. The descent felt longer than before. The air thickened with each step, filled with the scent of brine and iron. The walls seemed to weep, moisture dripping in slow trails that reflected her light like tears. When she reached the sublevel, she stopped. The corridor ahead was darker than before, though she could still see the faint veins of gold pulsing in the walls, slower, heavier, like a sleeping heart on the edge of waking. Her boots splashed through shallow water that hadn't been there that morning. The pumps had failed completely now. The casino was beginning to flood again, as if the sea was reclaiming its breath. The hum from the vault grew louder. She followed it through the corridor until the chamber opened before her. The sight stole the air from her lungs. The vault door stood wide open. It shouldn't have been possible. The keyhole was gone. The seals had been untouched. Yet there it was, yawning open by a foot or more, its edges slick with condensation. Cold air poured from the gap, heavy with the scent of salt and something else, something old and metallic, like gold left too long beneath the ocean. Lena raised her flashlight with trembling hands. The beam pierced the darkness just enough to glimpse what lay beyond. The vault's interior was vast, far larger than it should have been, stretching far past the walls of the casino itself. Piles of gold bars lay scattered like bones across the floor. Water dripped from the ceiling, each droplet echoing into infinity, and there, in the center of it all, lay a body. Her heart seized. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The figure was face down in a shallow pool of water, skin pale as marble. Mason, she whispered. Her voice trembled as she stepped closer, light shaking across the chamber. The beam touched the edge of his jacket, the same one he'd worn when he vanished. But as she knelt, reaching out, her breath stopped again. The face that turned toward her wasn't his. The eyes were open, clouded grey, staring without seeing. The skin was waxy and worn, as though the man had been dead for decades. His mouth hung slightly ajar, lips blue. In his hand, clenched so tightly his knuckles had split, was a coin, the same cracked crown, glinting gold. Lena staggered back, choking on air. Her flashlight flickered as she stumbled to her feet. The corpse's chest rose slightly, just enough to make her doubt what she saw. Then a sound, faint, hollow, echoed from deeper in the vault. Another exhale. The air around her shifted. Shadows rippled across the walls, moving them. Nothing cast them. She turned, sweeping the light across the room. The golden bars seemed to shimmer, their reflections twisting into shapes that weren't metal at all. Faces, hands, eyes. Lena's breath hitched. The vault wasn't filled with treasure. It was filled with echoes. Every coin, every bar of gold, every object reflected not the light, but the memory of those who'd touched it. Their movements, their whispers, their bargains. And now the whispers had found her. They rose like a tide, soft at first, then louder, until the whole chamber thrummed with their voices. Ezra Carter, her uncle's name, over and over, layered and distorted, like a choir underwater. She turned in a slow circle, shaking. "Where are you?" The whispers hushed all at once. Then, from the dark at the far end of the vault, something stepped forward. At first, she thought it was another corpse, its skin white and glistening, clothes heavy with water. But as the light caught its face, she froze. It was him, Ezra Carter. Her uncle looked exactly as he had in the faded photographs, sharp features, swept back hair, a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, but his skin shimmered faintly like the reflection of water on glass. He wasn't standing in the room, he was projected through it, like a memory trapped between worlds. "You came?" he said softly. His voice echoed, layered with the faint rush of waves. Lena's throat closed. "You're dead." "Death is an accounting error," he replied. "Debts live longer than their makers." Her pulse raced. "What did you do, Ezra? What is this?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that used to charm entire rooms, now warped by something hollow behind it. "A vault," he said. "A vault built not to protect fortune, but to imprison it. You cannot own what you steal from the sea. You can only borrow it." Her eyes darted around the room. The gold shimmered faintly, each bar exhaling mist. "You took from the tide," she whispered. "I offered it a deal," he said. "It gave me wealth beyond imagination. In return, it demanded one thing: a life for every fortune. A balance kept. When I failed to pay, it took everything." The floor trembled beneath her. The water rippled outward, darkening. "So this place—" "It's a prison," she said. Ezra's smile faded. "It's a mouth." A low rumble echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. The coins vibrated, the gold stacks shifting like restless sand. The air turned cold enough to sting her lungs. "You can still stop it," he said, his voice breaking into static, fading in and out. "Seal it again before it wakes fully. Before it remembers your name." "How?" He looked at her, really looked, with an expression she hadn't expected. "Sorrow. Return what I stole." The vision flickered, his image distorted, his outline collapsing into mist. "Return it. Before it claims you." Then he was gone. The vault shuddered. A deep, guttural groan rose from beneath the floor, the sound of stone splitting. Water surged up from the cracks, black and cold. Lena stumbled backward, gasping as the chamber began to flood. The golden spiral etched on the vault door flared to life. glowing like fire under the water. The whispers returned, louder now, countless voices blending into one. The debt must be paid. She turned and ran. The water rose fast, chasing her up the corridor. The flashlight beam darted across the walls as she climbed the staircase 2 steps at a time. The air roared with the sound of rushing water. By the time she reached the ballroom, the floor was shaking violently. Cracks snaked through the marble, light bleeding through them in thin gold veins. She looked back just once, through the open stairwell. The vault's golden light pulsed like a heartbeat, brighter, faster, alive. Then, bursting through the doors, she collapsed outside onto the terrace. The air hit her like a slap, freezing, sharp, filled with sea spray. Behind her, the casino rumbled. The walls flexed with the sound of something enormous moving below. She crawled to the edge of the terrace and looked down at the black waves crashing below. For a brief, surreal moment, the reflection of the king's tide shimmered on the surface, perfect and whole, as it must have looked the night it sank. Then, from the water, a single object floated up, spinning slowly in the moonlight. A coin. It drifted toward the shore, catching light on its surface. Lena reached out, trembling, and caught it before the tide could reclaim it. The crown symbol was clear, but this one bore no crack, no name. Only a single engraved word where the others had none. Air. The sea below roared, and in that moment, as thunder rolled across the horizon and lightning stitched white veins through the clouds, Lena understood what her uncle had meant. The sea didn't want his fortune back. It wanted her. The vault had not just breathed, it had chosen. And somewhere in the depths below, the casino's heart began to beat again. The morning after the storm, sunlight returned to Silverstrand for the first time in days. It was the kind of light that looked painted soft, honey, gold, pretending warmth while touching nothing. The sea, calm again, rippled gently around the terraces of the King's Tide Casino, which now stood fully above the water. From a distance it looked alive, as if it had never drowned, as if the decades beneath the tide were a rumor told by people who wanted to forget. Lena stood at the edge of the pier, the wind tangling her hair, watching workers haul cables and scaffolds around the casino's main entrance. She'd called for official help that morning, salvage, permits, restoration crews, a lawyer. She told herself she was doing it to protect what was hers, but even as the lie left her mouth, she could feel the truth gnawing inside. She didn't own this place. Not really. The sea owned it, and maybe now it owned her too. The bronze key hung from a chain around her neck, its weight an anchor she couldn't take off. Each time the wind shifted, it clicked softly against her chest like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something she didn't want to reach. Behind her, the crunch of gravel broke the silence. "You've done something remarkable," a voice said. Smooth, cultured, too calm for the ruin surrounding them. "Not many people can raise the dead." Lena turned. The man approaching her looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a coastal graveyard. Tailored charcoal suit, shoes far too clean for the mud of Silverstrand, and a smile so polished it reflected sunlight. His hair was dark, slicked back, and his eyes pale gray. Almost silver, didn't blink often enough. "I'm sorry," she said, instinctively guarded. "You are?" He extended a hand. "Damien Rourke. You might say I'm family." Lena hesitated, not taking his hand. "Family?" He smiled wider, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My grandfather, Charles Rourke, was Ezra Carter's business partner, at least until the King's Tide sank. When news spread that the casino had resurfaced, my firm began investigating ownership rights. Imagine our surprise to find the heir already here." Lena's pulse quickened. "You've been investigating me, not you," he said gently, "the property, but as it happens, the two are now very much connected." He turned his gaze toward the casino. "It's beautiful, isn't it, even half devoured by salt and time. I grew up hearing stories about this place the night it fell, the fortune that disappeared beneath it. My grandfather used to say that whatever happened here wasn't a failure, it was a pause. Lena folded her arms. I didn't revive it for profit. He chuckled softly. Of course you didn't. But profit has a way of finding people who pretend they don't want it. The words sank into her like slow poison. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't because part of her had felt the temptation, not for money, but for meaning, for control, for redemption. Rourke gestured toward the casino's entrance. May I? She hesitated. It's dangerous. All the best opportunities are, he said, and walked ahead before she could stop him. Inside, the light shifted from gold to grey. The air smelled of damp stone and rust. The golden spiral on the ballroom floor still faintly glowed beneath the thin layer of drying salt. The workers Rourke had brought, men in dark overalls, with no insignia, began setting up equipment. Cameras, metal detectors, excavation tools. They moved quietly, efficiently, like they'd been briefed long before arriving. Lena followed Rourke through the grand foyer. You act like you knew this would happen. He smiled over his shoulder. Your uncle left a long trail, Ms. Carter. Paperwork, investments, notes, all leading to this. He wasn't just building a casino, he was hiding something inside it. You found it. You just don't understand it yet. Her stomach twisted. You mean the vault? Exactly. He stopped at the staircase leading down to the lower levels, peering into the dark. My team's already running ground, penetrating scans. There's a massive sealed chamber under this ballroom, perfectly preserved. When we get it open, whatever's in there will rewrite history. Lena stepped in front of him, blocking his way. You can't go down there. Rourke tilted his head. Can't or shouldn't. You don't know what you're dealing with. He smiled faintly, as though humoring a superstition. Neither did Prometheus, but fire's still useful, isn't it? Her voice rose. You think this is a story about power. You have no idea what's down there. For the first time his expression hardened. On the contrary, I know exactly what's down there: money, gold, assets my family had a rightful claim to, and if there's something else, something more. He shrugged. Then we adapt. He brushed past her, heading for the sublevel. Lena followed, her pulse thundering. Rourke, stop. You can't. Relax, he said, voice calm, controlled. No one's opening anything yet. We're just assessing. But she could see it in his eyes, the same gleam she'd seen in old photos of Ezra Carter. That hunger, that belief that they could bend the ocean's will to their own. When they reached the lower corridor, Lena's breath caught. The water had drained completely. The vault door stood in full view, glistening with a faint sheen, its crown insignia reflecting the work lamps. But now it was sealed again, no gap, no breath, as if it had never opened. Rourke walked right up to it, hand grazing the metal. Magnificent, he whispered, perfectly engineered. You could drop a bomb on this thing and it wouldn't scratch. Lena's voice trembled. Don't touch it. He turned, studying her. You're shaking. You didn't hear it last night, she said. It breathed, it spoke. Rourke smiled faintly. I've seen plenty of vaults that speak, Ms. Carter. Usually, it's the air escaping from a decompression valve. It wasn't air. He held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed almost kindly. You've been through a trauma. Isolation, loss, exhaustion. I understand. My team will handle this now. You should get some rest. His condescension stung more than his words. You don't understand anything, she said. He turned back to the vault. Oh, I understand plenty. The difference between you and me is simple. You think this place is haunted. I think it's hiding something worth every risk. He placed his hand on the crown emblem. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the chamber shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but Lena felt it instantly. The hum returned. Rourke froze. His eyes flicked toward her. "You feel that?" She nodded slowly. "Now you believe me?" The crown beneath his hand began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter golden light seeping through his fingertips. He stepped back sharply. "What the hell?" The hum deepened. The vault exhaled, a hot breath of air flooding the chamber. The floodlights flickered. Rourke's men turned, startled. One muttered, "Sir, we're picking up vibration, a cut power." Rourke barked, "Too late." The lights burst overhead, showering sparks across the floor. The vault pulsed once, twice, then went still. A single droplet of water slid down the crown insignia, landing between them. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rourke straightened his jacket, forcing a smirk. Pressure shift, perfectly natural, nothing to worry about. But his voice cracked on the last word. Lena stared at him, her own fear buried under a new, colder realization Rourke wasn't going to stop. He didn't care what the vault was. He only cared what it could make him. She glanced back at the door, the faint outline of light still glowing beneath the crown. The vault was listening, watching, waiting. And, for the first time since the sea gave up the king's tide, Lena wasn't the only one it had set its eyes on. Outside, the waves shifted against the shore, soft at first, then stronger. The tide was turning. And beneath the casino, something vast and patient exhaled once more. The day stretched long and heavy, the kind that felt more like waiting than living. Clouds rolled in slow from the horizon, pressing down on Silverstrand with the weight of unspoken things. The sea looked black from the balcony of the king's tide, the wind shifting in strange, circular breaths, as if the ocean were turning over in its sleep. Lena stood alone in the grand ballroom, staring at the vault diagram spread across the floor, the golden spiral, its light pulsing faintly beneath the damp marble. The air tasted of metal and rain. Every few seconds, the faintest tremor passed through the floor, just enough to rattle the shards of chandelier glass that still clung to the edges of the room. She wasn't imagining it. The vault was restless again. Behind her, the sound of polished shoes echoed softly across the hall. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Damien Rourke's voice, smooth, deliberate, carrying that same calm authority that always felt like a threat disguised as admiration. It's strange how something so ruined can still look holy. Lena didn't turn. Holy things aren't built on greed. Neither are they abandoned by it. She finally looked back at him. Rourke stood under one of the broken skylights, hands in his pockets, a faint smile playing on his lips. His suit was immaculate despite the sea air. The man looked untouched by decay, as though the world around him aged while he stayed perfectly, unnaturally polished. "What do you really want, Rourke?" she asked. He tilted his head, studying her. "The same thing your uncle wanted: control, legacy, the ability to walk into a storm and have it bow instead of break you." She laughed bitterly. "You talk about control, but you don't even realize this place is alive." "Alive?" He chuckled softly. "Ms. Carter, you've spent too much time alone in the dark. The mind does strange things down here. I heard it breathe," she said. "It's not imagination, it spoke." Rourke's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. "And what did it say?" Her voice lowered. "That the debt must be paid." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, the sound of his footsteps merging with the distant rumble of thunder. "Then perhaps it's time someone collected." Lena tensed. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." He glanced toward the sealed vault door, gleaming under the low light. "Your uncle wasn't the only one who kept secrets. My grandfather was there the night this place went under. He survived the storm that swallowed it. And before he died, he told me something I've never forgotten." He paused, his voice softening. He said the king's tide wasn't built to make money. It was built to make men gods. Lena's skin prickled, and look how that ended. Rourke's smile turned thin. Perhaps they simply lacked the conviction to finish what they started. He motioned toward the entrance, and two of his men appeared, dark uniforms, blank expressions, efficient. They began unloading equipment, cutting torches, seismic sensors, portable drills. Lena stepped forward. "No, you can't open it. It's not safe." Rourke ignored her. "Begin scanning the outer casing. I want full-dimensional mapping before we attempt entry." The men obeyed without question. Sparks flared as metal met metal, echoing through the chamber like gunfire. The hum beneath the floor deepened, faint but undeniable. "Rourke, listen to me," Lena pleaded. "Every time someone disturbs that door, something happens. It's not a machine, it's a warning. It takes what it's owed." He turned to her, calm, composed. "And what if what it's owed is already dead?" She shook her head. "You don't get it. It's not just death. It's exchange. It wants balance." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And if balance requires a sacrifice, Ms. Carter, maybe that's the price of history." Her pulse spiked. "You're insane." He smiled faintly. "No, I'm ambitious." The machines roared louder. Sparks flew as one of the drills bit into the vault's surface. The air shifted. Every light in the chamber flickered. The hum beneath their feet rose like a living thing, a vibration that crawled up the spine, subtle at first, then deafening. The crown emblem glowed gold, then red, then back again, pulsing in sync with the drills. "Kill the power," Lena shouted. Rourke's men hesitated, glancing toward him. He didn't move. Then, with a sound like thunder striking metal, the drills stopped on their own. The vault door pulsed once, a heartbeat through steel, and a blast of air tore through the chamber. The floodlights blew out. The room plunged into darkness. Lena's scream was swallowed by the echo of rushing air. For a few seconds, only the roar of the wind filled the vault room, that same exhale she'd heard before, but louder, angrier. The smell of salt and metal flooded the space. Then came the voice, low, deep, like 1,000 whispers speaking in unison. "The debt remains." A flashlight beam flared on. One of Rourke's men stumbled backward, his face pale. "Sir, something's moving in there." Rourke's voice was calm, but his tone cracked on the edges. "Stand firm." The floor rippled. A faint film of water spread across the marble, thin but alive, shifting toward the vault. The crown emblem burned bright gold, light spilling across the floor and climbing the walls like liquid fire. Lena backed away. "You see it now. Tell them to stop." Rourke didn't move. His eyes were locked on the vault. He was mesmerized. "Do you feel it?" he murmured. "It's power, pure and ancient. My grandfather was right, it's not a curse. It's an inheritance." Lena stared at him, disbelief and horror mixing in her voice. "It's going to kill you." He turned toward her slowly, that same eerie calm returning. "Then at least I'll die wealthy." The vault's hum deepened into a roar. Water surged up from the cracks, swirling around their feet. The sound of voices filled the air, disembodied, layered, impossible to place. The words blurred, overlapping, fragments of the same phrase over and over. "Balance must be kept. The sea remembers." The lights above flickered back on in bursts, illuminating the chaos. Rourke's men shouting, equipment sparking, water spreading fast. "Get back!" Lena screamed. "Everyone out." Rourke didn't move. He was staring at the vault with something close to reverence. "Open it," he whispered. "Sir," one of his men shouted. "We can't open it." Before Lena could stop him, Rourke lunged forward, grabbing the cutting torch from one of his crew and pressing it against the vault's crown. The effect was immediate. A blinding flash of light erupted from the door, flinging him backward. The torch exploded, sparks raining across the water. One of the men screamed, clutching his face as steam filled the room. Lena shielded her eyes. The golden spiral burned through the fog, alive again, glowing from beneath the floor. Rourke groaned, pushing himself up. His eyes were wild now, pupils blown wide. "It spoke to me," he gasped. "It knows me." She stared at him, shaking. "It doesn't know you. It's using you." He smiled, blood trailing from the corner of his mouth. "That's what power always does." The vault went silent. The glow faded to a dull ember. Rourke staggered to his feet. "Get the equipment ready," he rasped. "Tomorrow we open it properly." Lena's voice trembled. "You open that vault, and this place won't just drown again. It'll take everything, the town, the bay, all of it." He leaned close enough that she could smell the faint tang of smoke on his breath. "Then I suppose you'd better hope you're on the right side of history." He turned and walked away, his men following him out. When their footsteps vanished, the chamber fell still again. The air hung heavy with burnt ozone and salt. Lena stood alone in the flickering dark, staring at the faint glow still pulsing beneath the crown. She felt it watching her, not the vault, not even the sea, something deeper, older, patient. She sank to her knees, clutching the key that hung around her neck. It was hot again, almost burning her skin. The sea outside let out a low, distant growl, thunder rolling without storm. And in that hollow quiet between beats, Lena realized what Rourke couldn't see. The vault didn't want to be opened by force. It wanted to be invited, and soon one of them would give it exactly what it was waiting for. Night fell like an omen. The sky over Silverstrand churned with dark clouds, restless and bruised, the kind that swallowed starlight whole. The air was thick with electricity, not yet a storm, but something worse, something waiting. The sea was no longer calm. It heaved in slow, deliberate waves, slapping the terraces of the King's Tide Casino as if to remind it who it belonged to. Lena stood at the edge of the marble balcony, staring into that endless black water. The bronze key around her neck was burning again, pulsing like a living thing. Each beat matched the distant thunder. She could feel it, the vault beneath the casino stirring, breathing faster now, as if its heart were sinking with the approaching storm. Behind her, the ballroom glowed with artificial light. Rourke's crew had turned the casino into a mechanical battlefield, generators humming, cables snaking across the floor, cameras flashing. The golden spiral beneath the marble floor had come alive again, its veins lit with molten gold, tracing toward the center where the vault waited far below. They were going to open it tonight. Lena had begged them to stop. She'd shouted, warned, pleaded, but Rourke wasn't listening anymore. Whatever had happened in that chamber the night before had changed him. His calm, calculated demeanor had given way to something unhinged, a fever masked by a smile. Now he moved among the men like a conductor, barking orders, adjusting controls, his silver eyes bright with obsession. "Pressure readings stable?" he asked. "Steady." One of his engineers replied. "Thermal scanners still can't penetrate the inner shell." Rourke smirked. "That's because it isn't steel, it's older, something purer. The vault wasn't built, it was forged." Lena stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed tightly, the hum of the machinery filling her bones. "You don't even know what you're opening," she said. "You think it's a door, it's not, it's a wound." Rourke turned to her, still smiling, though his voice was colder now. "You think too small, Ms. Carter. Your uncle didn't fear this vault. He revered it. He understood that fortune favors those who aren't afraid to reach into the dark. You're not reaching," she snapped. "You're digging your own grave." He stepped closer, his shadow merging with hers beneath the trembling light. "If that's the price of history, so be it. But I don't intend to die. I intend to inherit." Lightning flared through the cracked skylight above, flooding the ballroom in ghostly white. For an instant, The reflection of the ocean shimmered across the walls, waves crashing, distorted, like something alive pressing against the glass. The power flickered, then steadied. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's watching us." Rourke smiled, "Then let it see what we've become." He gestured to his crew. "Begin the descent." The machinery roared to life. Massive winches groaned as the floor of the ballroom, the golden spiral, began to shift again. The sound was deafening, metal grinding against ancient stone. Dust rained from the ceiling. The entire building trembled. As the platform lowered, revealing the stairwell beneath, cold air surged up from below, air that smelled of brine and age and something faintly metallic, like blood in water. Lena felt her stomach twist. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. She had to see it. She needed to see it. Rourke descended first, flashlight in hand, his crew following. The beam of light caught the slick, wet walls, the veins of gold pulsing faintly within them. Lena followed last, her hand gripping the railing so hard her knuckles whitened. When they reached the chamber, the vault stood before them, vast, ancient, breathing. The crown emblem glowed brighter than ever, gold bleeding into crimson. The air hummed, vibrating with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Rourke approached it like a priest before an altar. Magnificent, he whispered, even the ocean couldn't bury this. Lena's breath trembled. It didn't want to. He turned to her. "You're wrong." He placed a gloved hand against the door. It needed someone worthy enough to bring it back. The moment his skin met the metal, the light flared. The vault exhaled a powerful, shuddering breath that blew dust and water across the chamber. The crew staggered back, shielding their faces. Then the hum deepened into a voice, low, layered, vibrating through the stone and air alike. The sea remembers its own. The lights flickered, strobed, then steadied again. Rourke laughed, actually laughed, eyes wide, unblinking. "It's responding," he shouted over the noise. "It knows I'm here." Lena's fear spiked into anger. "You idiot! It's not calling to you. It's warning you." But he didn't hear her. He turned toward his men. "Start the charge." They hesitated. One of them, a young technician, barely older than 20, said, "Sir, maybe we should." "Do it," Rourke screamed. Sparks burst as they activated the plasma cutters. The hiss of molten metal filled the chamber, glowing blue against the vault's surface. Steam rolled through the air, and the vault began to bleed. Dark, thick water seeped from the edges, pooling around their boots. It smelled like rot and copper, like something buried too long. Lena stepped back. "Rourke, stop." The the first explosion hit. A blinding flash of gold light burst from the crown insignia, knocking everyone off their feet. The cutters shorted out instantly. The hum became a roar, the kind of sound that wasn't meant for human ears, deep, ancient, angry. Lena crawled toward the wall, coughing, her vision blurring. She could taste salt and metal in the air. Rourke was already back on his feet, his face lit by the vault's glow. "Do you see it?" he shouted. "It's opening." The crown symbol at the center of the door split, not cracked, but unfolded, like something blooming. Beneath it, a faint seam widened, spilling light across the chamber. The gold wasn't gold anymore. It was fire. The vault opened an inch, then another. Steam gushed out, filling the room with a blinding fog. The hum turned into a heartbeat, pounding through the walls, through her chest, through the sea itself, and then silence. A single droplet fell from the ceiling, echoing like a bell. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. "Rourke," she whispered, "don't." He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the light pouring from the vault's crack. "You can't stop destiny." The vault door shifted one last time. A gust of air blew outward, wet and heavy, carrying with it something metallic that clinked across the floor, a single gold coin. It rolled until it stopped by Lena's boot. She picked it up, her hand trembling. The crown on it was sharper now, the engraving newer, and beneath it, a single word etched in perfect precision. Rourke. Her blood went cold. She looked up. It's naming you. But he wasn't listening. He was staring into the light, smiling, eyes wide with awe. It's beautiful. The door opened wider 3 feet now. Light and mist poured out, swirling like smoke. Shapes began to form within it, shifting shadows of people moving beneath the surface, like reflections trapped in water. Rourke took a step forward. Lena reached out. Don't. He turned, smiling softly, his face illuminated by the vault's impossible glow. Don't you understand? This is what he promised me. This is the fortune my family was owed. And then he stepped through. The light swallowed him. A flash brighter than lightning filled the chamber, followed by a sound like a wave collapsing over the earth. Lena shielded her face, falling to her knees as the air split with a scream not from Rourke, not human at all, but something vast and unearthly. When she opened her eyes again, the light was gone. The vault door stood open just enough to show a darkness beyond, deeper than black, a darkness that moved. Rourke was gone. The chamber was flooding. Water surged from beneath the vault, rising fast. Lena scrambled to her feet and ran for the staircase, the roar of the sea following her, echoing up the hall. When she burst into the ballroom, lightning crashed through the dome above. The power failed completely. The golden spiral blazed with its own light, casting long, violent shadows. Behind her, the vault below screamed one final time, a sound that split the air like the wail of something ancient and betrayed. And then the water came. It erupted through the cracks, surging across the floor in a single unstoppable wave. Lena barely made it to the terrace before the flood swallowed the ballroom hall. She clung to the railing, gasping for air as the storm broke over Silver Strand. The casino, the King's Tide, glowed faintly beneath the lightning. For a moment, it looked exactly as it had in its prime, alive, golden, magnificent. Then, beneath the roar of the storm, Lena heard it again, a voice rising from below, calm and clear. The debt is claimed, and in that instant, she knew. Rourke hadn't inherited the fortune. He had become it. The vault hadn't been opened to release what was inside. It had opened to feed. The storm struck with the violence of prophecy. Rain hurled itself against the King's Tide casino, each drop a shard of glass in the howling wind. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the once sunken monument in flashes of silver and gold. The sea raged as if trying to reclaim its stolen creation. And through it all, Lena Carter ran. She fought her way back inside, soaked, breath-ragged, boots slamming against marble now slick with seawater. The casino wasn't just flooding, it was transforming. The floor heaved and shuddered as though the building itself were breathing with the vault below. Gold veins spread along the walls, pulsing like arteries, spilling light into the storm. Every chandelier that hadn't shattered earlier now swung wildly in the wind. Some broke loose, crashing into the water with the sound of bells being drowned. The grand piano in the corner of the ballroom rolled across the floor, colliding with a column, the keys screaming discordant notes that echoed like laughter. Lena pressed forward, gripping the banister as thunder split the air. The vault door below had been torn fully open, now she could feel it. A magnetic pull deep beneath her feet, tugging at the air itself. The sea was coming in. Waves crashed through the shattered terrace doors, pouring into the casino in roaring cascades. The current nearly dragged her off her feet, slamming her against a pillar. She gasped, clutching the bronze key that still hung from her neck, the only thing warm in the freezing chaos. The key pulsed again, once, twice, then steady a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Lena turned toward the ballroom's center. Through the chaos of wind and water, she saw it, the golden spiral glowing brighter than ever, searing through the rising flood like sunlight trapped beneath the floor. The spiral wasn't painted, it was alive. Symbols began to appear within it, letters and numbers weaving together, forming words she couldn't understand. The glow rose from beneath the surface, bending through the water, casting the walls in molten light. Then, beneath the roar of the storm, another sound broke through, a whisper, no hundreds of them. They poured through the cracks in the floor, rising with the tide. Male, female, old, young, 1,000 lost voices speaking as one. Balance, debt, memory. Lena stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Stop," she screamed. "I don't want it." The voices ignored her. The gold veins climbed the pillars now, racing toward the ceiling, twisting like vines. Lightning flashed again, and in that light, she saw them, figures, dozens of them, standing in the flooded ballroom, half-transparent, shimmering like ghosts caught between worlds. They wore fine suits, elegant gowns, casino uniforms, the guests of the king's tide, preserved in the instant of their death. They weren't haunting the casino, they were the casino. One by one, their heads turned toward her. She took a step back, trembling. "What do you want from me?" They spoke together, voices layered, deep and resonant. "You carry his blood. You carry his debt." Lena shook her head. "No, that's not mine. That's Ezra's. Blood remembers. The sea remembers." Their reflections rippled in the rising water, faces breaking, reforming, whispering. Lena's chest heaved. "You said the debt was paid. You took work." Thunder exploded overhead, drowning her words. When it faded, the answer came low, mournful. "One debt closed, one remains." The golden spiral flared white, hot. Lena stumbled to her knees, blinded by light. Her hands hit the marble, burning against it. The warmth surged through her palms, up her arms, into her chest, a current of energy that wasn't physical but spiritual. Like the ocean's pulse itself was flooding her veins. Images flashed in her mind: Ezra Carter, standing in the same room decades ago, laughter and champagne echoing behind him. The vault newly built, gleaming like a crown. The storm outside that night. His promise to the sea whispered under his breath. Fortune for life, life for fortune. And then water, screams. The king's tide breaking apart under the hurricane, dragging every sinner and gambler beneath the surface, sealing them inside the vault's heart. Ezra's eyes, wide with horror, as he realized the ocean wasn't taking his enemies. It was taking everyone. Lena screamed, and the vision shattered. She fell forward, gasping, the sound of her heartbeat deafening in her ears. The ghosts were closer now, circling her. Their forms flickered in and out, bending in the glow. Among them she saw a familiar face, Mason. He stood at the edge of the circle, pale and silent, eyes wide but gentle. He didn't speak, but his lips moved. "Run." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't." Behind him, another figure stepped forward, older, solid, more real than the rest. Ezra Carter. His expression was solemn, regret carved deep into his translucent face. "You have to finish it," he said. His voice was clearer than the others, echoing through the roaring storm. "Finish what?" "The debt," he said. "Seal it?" The ghosts turned toward the vault entrance. The water there glowed with a light so bright it looked like molten sun. The storm howled, rattling the shattered glass. Lena rose unsteadily, clutching the key around her neck. "Tell me how." Ezra's form flickered, fading. "Return what was never yours, close what I opened." "How?" She screamed again, but he was already gone. The floor cracked under her. The spiral's glow intensified until it was unbearable, lighting the entire ballroom in pure white. The golden lines split, forming one final message, a circle enclosing a crown, surrounded by the words, "The sea gives once, it takes forever." The sound of rushing water grew deafening. The vault was fully open now. From the stairwell below came a light blinding gold, the kind that should have been holy but wasn't. It pulsed in rhythm with the thunder, casting silhouettes against the walls, shapes of faces, screaming soundlessly within it. And from that light, something began to rise, not a man, not a creature, something formless, a shape made of water, smoke, and fire, coalescing into the vague outline of a crown, the voice of the sea itself. The ghosts dropped to their knees, their bodies dissolving into the light. Lena stumbled backward, shaking. No. The voice spoke through every drop of water in the room, low and thunderous. He took what was mine. You carry his name, now carry his end. The key around her neck ignited, branding her skin. She screamed, ripping it off, throwing it into the spiral. The moment it touched the marble, the light exploded outward. A sound like 1,000 waves crashing at once filled the air. The entire casino shuddered, walls splitting, water roaring through the corridors. Lena ran for the exit, the floor collapsing behind her. The terrace doors blew open as the sea itself surged inward, swallowing chandeliers, tables, the grand staircase. She stumbled outside just as the final lightning bolt struck the dome, shattering it completely. The king's tide screamed, not collapsing, not dying, exhaling. For a heartbeat, the entire structure shone gold, every window alive with light. Through the blinding brilliance, Lena saw the ballroom as it had been in 1958, alive, crowded, glorious, music playing, champagne bubbling, Ezra standing in his white suit beneath the chandeliers, raising a glass to the sea. Then it was gone. The light imploded, sucking inward like a breath drawn by something ancient and unseen. The casino began to sink, not slowly, but violently, dragged by unseen hands beneath the roaring black waves. Lena ran until her lungs burned, the ground trembling under her feet. She reached the cliffside road just in time to see the final roof of the King's Tide vanish beneath the surface. Then, silence. The storm broke apart, the rain stopping mid, all as if the world itself were exhausted. The sea flattened, calm again, too calm. Lena collapsed to her knees, staring at the dark water. The waves shimmered faintly, gold light flickering deep beneath their surface, fading slowly, like a heartbeat surrendering to stillness. She wept, though she didn't know if it was grief or relief. Somewhere in that black water lay Ezra, Mason, Rourke, the King's Tide, and the vault sealed again by the sea's own will. But as the dawn began to bleed through the clouds, Lena saw something glimmering on the sand below the cliffs. She stood, stumbling toward it. It was a single gold coin, half buried in the wet earth. She brushed the sand away and froze. The crown was gone. In its place were engraved words she had never seen before, words that didn't belong to the sea, or the curse, or even to Ezra. Balance kept. The sun broke the horizon, warm and fragile, turning the wet cliffs to fire, and for the first time since she'd opened that cursed door, Lena Carter smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd survived. The sea was quiet, but beneath that quiet, far below the waves, the faint echo of a heartbeat pulsed once, twice, then stopped, for now the sea had gone silent again, too silent. After the storm's fury and the vault's awakening, the stillness felt unnatural, the kind of silence that arrives not from peace, but from exhaustion. The King's Tide Casino, or what remained of it, sat half-sub, merged in the bruised grey dawn, its upper floors jutting from the water like the ribs of a drowned beast. Lena stood on the terrace, wrapped in a torn raincoat, her body trembling from cold and shock. Every muscle burned, every breath carried the sting of salt. The ocean breeze tasted metallic, thick with the memory of lightning. She had watched it sink again, watched the waves swallow the ballroom, the vault, the ghosts. But somehow, impossibly, she had survived. She didn't know why. Maybe because the sea hadn't decided yet whether to claim her. The horizon was pale and endless. The tide had receded just enough to reveal part of the marble stairwell leading into the casino's lower decks. Her eyes lingered on it. Every part of her screamed to leave, to drive away, to vanish, to pretend the tide had taken everything. But something deeper pulled her back. Not greed, not even guilt. Just the sense that the story wasn't over, and that the sea wouldn't let her go until she saw the end herself. She tightened her grip on the railing and descended into the ruin. The air grew colder as she moved downward. The sound of dripping water echoed through the corridors, each drop amplified into a steady heartbeat. The walls glistened, alive with condensation, reflecting faint threads of light filtering through cracks above. The lower levels were still flooding, the floor coated with a thin layer of black water. It lapped against her boots as she stepped through the wreckage. Shattered chandeliers and overturned tables floated lazily past, like relics of a forgotten empire. Every so often, she caught glimpses of faces in the water, faint, fleeting, gone before she could be sure they were ever there. She whispered to herself, "Don't look down, just breathe." But the deeper she went, the louder the whispering became. Not from her mind this time, from the walls. The casino itself was murmuring, as if it remembered every promise made within it. At the end of the corridor, she reached the ballroom door. It was partially caved in, the frame warped and dripping. Beyond it, faint light shimmered across the rising water. She pushed through, shoulders scraping against cold marble, and stepped inside. The golden spiral was gone. The floor where it had burned so fiercely the night before was now fractured, pieces of marble floating apart like ice. Through the gaps, she could see the faint glow of something deeper, a soft, rhythmic pulse. The vault, still alive, still breathing. A single voice rose from the dark, so sudden it made her stumble. "You shouldn't have come back." Lena froze. The voice was calm, steady, and human. She turned, and there he was, Damien Rourke, alive. He stood on the far side of the ballroom, drenched but smiling faintly, the faint light of the vault reflecting off his soaked suit. His face looked wrong, too pale, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, but his presence undeniable. "You," her voice broke, "you went into the vault." "I did," he said softly, as if describing a dream, "and I saw everything." He stepped closer, boots rippling the shallow water. "You were right, you know. It's not just a vault, it's a memory, a mirror. It shows you what you are when everything else is stripped away." She backed away, shaking her head. "You should be dead." He smiled, faint and unsteady. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm just what's left when the sea's done taking its share." Lena's pulse raced. The gold light beneath the cracks flickered faster, mirroring her heartbeat. "What did it show you?" His smile vanished. "It showed me the truth, that your uncle didn't build this place alone, that the fortune buried here wasn't his to give. My family helped him take it from the workers who built it, from the town that fed it. Every coin in that vault is a life owed, and when the sea came for us, it decided to collect from both bloodlines." He stepped closer, his voice hardening. "But I've seen what's inside. I've touched it. I've felt it. And I know now that what's buried here doesn't belong to the sea anymore." Lena's breath caught. "You can't own it." He tilted his head. "Ownership is just survival written in gold." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face. For a moment, she saw something behind his eyes, not reflection, not madness, but movement. The faint shimmer of liquid light, pulsing like the gold veins that once ran through the marble. The vault had marked him. Lena whispered, "You brought something back." He smiled again, but this time it was hollow. "No, it brought me." Before she could react, he moved fast, grabbing her wrist. His grip was cold as seawater. "You can't run from it, Lena. You and I, we're both heirs now. You opened the door, and I stepped through. The tide doesn't care who pays, as long as the debt is balanced." She tried to pull free, but his strength was inhuman. "Let go." "Why?" he hissed. "So you can close it. You think you can undo what's already in motion. You're just like him. Ezra thought he could outsmart the sea. You'll die trying." She slammed her elbow into his chest, breaking free. He stumbled backward, water splashing high. Lightning struck again, lighting the entire room, and in that instant she saw it. His reflection in the water was wrong. It didn't move like his body. It twisted, convulsed, staring up at her with eyes made of liquid gold. Rourke looked down, gasping. His reflection reached toward him. No. Before he could step back, the water surged upward, wrapping around his legs. He screamed, falling to his knees as the golden liquid climbed higher, gripping him like hands. "Help me," he choked, reaching for Lena. She hesitated, torn between mercy and terror, but the voice of the vault whispered through the air, low and final, "The debt must be even." The gold swallowed him whole. Lena fell back, shielding her eyes as the water exploded upward, then collapsed into stillness. When she dared to look again, Rourke was gone. The ballroom was silent except for the steady dripping of water. Then the voice came again, softer this time, almost gentle. "One remains." The light beneath the cracks dimmed. The hum faded, and for a moment Lena thought it was over. She was wrong. The water around her began to rise again, but not from the sea. It was coming from within the floor itself, bubbling upward in thick black streams. She turned toward the staircase, but before she could reach it, a blast of air knocked her off her feet. The vault roared below, the sound of metal twisting under impossible pressure. She crawled forward, gasping, water rising to her chest. No, 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 no. The bronze key, now cold and lifeless, slipped from her pocket and vanished beneath the flood. Lightning illuminated the ceiling again, and for a split second she saw her reflection in the water, and behind it, the silhouette of something vast and shifting, shaped like a crown. The floor cracked. The vault screamed, and the last thing Lena saw before the world went black was the ballroom collapsing around her, the sea rushing in, dragging her into the depths where air no longer existed, only memory, and the echo of a voice she couldn't silence. The debt must be paid. There was no sky anymore, no surface, no up or down, only the weight of the ocean pressing from every side, cold, infinite, eternal. Lena's lungs burned as she sank, her body twisting in the current. The light from above dissolved into shadow. The king's tide was gone. The world was gone. All that remained was the dull, endless roar of the sea swallowing itself. She tried to swim, but the water was thick, not water at all, but something heavier, thicker, more alive. Every movement felt wrong, as if the current itself resisted her escape. Her hands reached upward toward the faintest glimmer of light far above, but it slipped farther away the harder she tried. When she opened her mouth to scream, the ocean rushed in. The salt burned her throat, her chest, her eyes. Her thoughts fractured. Then, through the haze, she saw them, faces, hundreds of them, suspended in the water around her, pale, glowing faintly gold, their eyes open and unblinking. They drifted like forgotten memories, hair floating like seaweed, mouths moving soundlessly. They weren't haunting her, they were showing her. Visions flooded her mind fast, sharp, unbearable. Ezra Carter, standing in the casino's vault 50 years ago, surrounded by men with greedy eyes and trembling hands. The storm raging outside, the deal whispered beneath the thunder. The sea had offered them a gift, eternal fortune, wealth drawn from the deep. All it asked for was faith, but faith, Ezra had learned too late, meant sacrifice. Every coin forged in that vault had been tempered with a life. Every win in the king's tide had been purchased with a loss somewhere else. The ocean had kept perfect books, and when the debts grew too large, it came to collect. The hurricane of 1958 wasn't a natural disaster. It was an audit. Lena gasped, thrashing, bubbles spilling from her mouth. The golden faces swirled around her, forming a ring. Their whispers filled the water, slow and melodic. He built upon lies. You inherited the debt. She shook her head, screaming soundlessly. No, you opened the door. You carried the key. Her body trembled violently as the voices surrounded her, their tone shifting from accusation to lament. One more life, and the sea sleeps. The water pressed harder, crushing her chest. Her thoughts blurred into flashes of memory: her divorce, her son's face, the foreclosure notice, the night she'd found the letter that led her here. All of it had started because she'd wanted a second chance, because she'd believed there was something left worth saving. But the truth hit her now like a wave-breaking bone. She hadn't been chosen by her uncle. She'd been summoned. Her desperation had answered a call older than her family, older than Silverstrand itself. The sea didn't choose saints. It chose the broken. Her chest convulsed. Her body began to fade into the cold. She could feel the darkness pulling at the edges of her mind, luring her into quiet oblivion. Then a voice, softer than the rest, familiar, breathed. Lena's eyes opened, vision blurring. A figure was before her, faint, shimmering, surrounded by light. Mason, she mouthed. He nodded, his expression calm, almost kind. You're not done yet. I can't, she tried to say, but her lungs refused her. You can. His voice echoed, clear even through the suffocating dark. It's not asking for you to die. It's asking for you to see. The light around him brightened, spreading through the water, cutting through the shadow. The golden faces dissolved, fading into stillness. Mason reached forward, touching her hand. It's not the sea that holds the debt, Lena. It's the people who make promises they never intend to keep. Your uncle, Rourke, me, all of us. She shook her head weakly. Then why me? His answer was simple. Because you're the first one who came back to pay it. And then he was gone. The water shifted. A low rumble rose from below, not thunder, not the vault's breath, but something deeper. The ocean around her began to glow with a pale, ethereal light, spiraling upward like a golden current. The current lifted her, pushing her toward the surface. Her chest felt like it was tearing apart, her vision going white. Then air. She broke through the surface with a violent gasp, sucking in oxygen like it was fire. The waves crashed around her, the night sky flickering with lightning. The rain stung her skin, cold and real. The remains of the king's tide drifted in the distance, half sunk, half standing, glowing faintly from within like an ember refusing to die. She kicked weakly toward the ruins, her muscles screaming. By the time she reached the edge of the collapsed terrace, she could barely move. She hauled herself onto the marble, collapsing on her back, gasping for breath. The world tilted and spun. Every breath felt like a miracle. When she finally lifted her head, she saw the vault again, or what was left of it. The door was twisted open, half collapsed, light still seeping through the cracks. But it wasn't gold anymore. It was pale, almost white, fading, soft. Something floated to the surface of the floodwater near the vault. She crawled closer, her hand shaking. It was a coin. She lifted it, water dripping from her trembling fingers. The crown engraving had changed again. The word beneath it no longer read Rourke, nor heir. It read simply, freed. Her eyes burned with tears. She clutched the coin to her chest, collapsing against the wet marble. The sea had released its claim. But as she lay there, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, startled, but no one was there. Only the faint shimmer of reflected water dancing along the walls. Then a voice, faint, breathy, almost kind. Balance kept. She looked down. The key that had fallen from her pocket earlier floated in the shallows beside her, its bronze dull now, lifeless. She reached for it. It was cold, inert. A symbol, nothing more. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the chamber one final time. The faces that had haunted the walls were gone. The whispers had stilled. For the first time since she'd arrived in Silverstrand, there was silence, not the false silence of waiting, but true quiet. the kind that follows forgiveness. Lena stood slowly, her body trembling but alive. She walked toward the broken terrace, staring out at the endless grey sea. The waves had calmed. The air smelled clean again. She whispered, "It's over." But deep below, beneath the now stilled casino, something pulsed once faint, like the echo of a final breath. Not hungry, not vengeful, just alive, as if the sea itself had sighed in relief. Lena turned away from the water, clutching the coin in her fist. The storm had passed, the debt was settled. But the tide, the eternal tide, was already retreating, carrying with it everything she'd buried and everything she'd become. And as she stepped through the shattered doors, the faintest shimmer of light glowed beneath the water behind her, one last ripple across the surface. It looked almost like a crown, then it faded, swallowed by the depths, and the ocean went still. Morning broke with a fragile light. The sky over Silverstrand was pale gold, soft and trembling after the storm's rage. The ocean lay flat as glass now, stretching to the horizon like an unbroken mirror. The waves whispered gently against the rocks, as if ashamed of their violence the night before. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena Carter could breathe without the taste of salt and fear in her lungs. She stood on the cliffside overlooking the bay, wrapped in a grey coat that fluttered in the wind. Her hair clung to her face, still damp from the night's chaos, her eyes fixed on the water below. The sea that had nearly claimed her was calm again, almost impossibly calm, as though nothing monstrous had ever stirred beneath it. But the King's Tide Casino was gone, completely. Not a trace of marble or gold or glass. Remained only the faint swirl of mist above the waves where it had once stood. She felt no relief in the emptiness, only the strange weight of silence. In her hand, she turned the final coin she'd found after the flood, the one etched with a single word, "Freed." The metal was cool and light, harmless now. Whatever power it once carried had dissolved with the tide. Behind her, the distant wail of sirens broke the stillness. Police cars lined the coastal road, their lights flashing faintly against the grey sky. Down below, a small crowd of locals gathered, their faces pale with awe and disbelief. Silverstrand had woken to a miracle or a nightmare. The storm had unearthed what the sea had hidden for decades. The shoreline was littered with debris, splintered beams, rusted signs, and fragments of the casino's once gilded architecture. Among them were hundreds of gold coins, glimmering in the morning light. Fishermen, rescuers, and reporters were already swarming the beach, gathering what they could, though each time someone touched a coin, the waves seemed to shift closer, as if warning them not to. Lena turned away from the sight. The world didn't need another curse. A voice behind her broke her thoughts. "MS. Carter," she turned. Sheriff Hale, weathered, tired, and familiar, stood a few paces away. His uniform was soaked, his face lined deeper than she remembered. He'd been the one who'd warned her weeks ago to leave Silverstrand alone. Now he just looked at her with something between pity and respect. "You're lucky to be alive." She gave a faint, humorless smile. Luck had nothing to do with it. He glanced toward the sea. "We found your friend's truck down by the docks. Rourke, right, his men too. None of them made it." Lena's gaze didn't waver. The sea took what it was owed. The sheriff exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the morning air. "There's going to be an investigation, you know. The vault, the storm hell, people are saying they saw lights under the water, like the bay was on fire." "It was," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, uncertain whether she was confessing or grieving. "You should come with us. Get checked out, get warm. In a minute." He nodded, then walked back toward the vehicles, leaving her alone again with the sea. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and ash. Lena closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. She thought of Ezra, the uncle she barely remembered, but whose choices had nearly destroyed her. She thought of Rurk, swallowed by the very greed that had built his name, and she thought of the voices, the whispers that had haunted her dreams since the first day she'd arrived. They were silent now. The ocean had gone still not because it was empty, but because it was finally satisfied. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the trance. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. MS Carter. A woman's voice said calm, professional, rehearsed. This is Natalie Winters with the Silverstrand Historical Commission. We've been informed you're the surviving heir to Ezra Carter's estate. Lena almost laughed. Estate? You mean the wreckage? Well, that's just it, the woman continued. The casino itself may be gone, but the land beneath it and the bay it occupies technically still falls under your inheritance. There's quite a bit to sort out. Ownership rights, insurance claims, maritime law. It's all rather complicated. Everything about this place is complicated. Lena said quietly, I understand. Natalie replied gently, but you should know something. The state surveyors found ledgers washed ashore this morning, documents from Ezra Carter's archives. They're being catalogued now, but early reports say they contain incriminating financial records, evidence of money laundering, fraud, and several offshore accounts linked to the Rurk family. Lena froze. Say that again. Your uncle kept records, MS Carter, detailed ones. He hid them somewhere inside the vault. It seems the storm brought them back up. For a long moment, Lena said nothing. The wind roared around her, tugging at her coat, her hair. The words echoed in her head like a tide reversing. The ledger, the one she'd seen flashes of in her visions, the one that damned every greedy hand that had ever touched the king's tide. She realized what the sea had done. It hadn't just taken, it had returned something too, justice. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Send me the copies, every page, of course. Our office will coordinate with law enforcement for preservation. Lena hung up, her pulse thundering. Below, officers and volunteers were gathering the scattered coins and ledgers from the shore. Some of the pages glimmered faintly with salt, the ink smeared but still legible. The king's tide had revealed its final confession. The waves lapped softly at the sand, tugging at the edges of each page as if reluctant to let go. Lena turned away and began walking down the hill toward town. The wind pushed gently at her back, like the sea itself urging her forward. She no longer felt haunted. Just hollow, the kind of hollow that comes after a story ends, when the echoes finally fade. But as she reached the edge of the cliff road, she stopped and looked back one last time. The sun had broken through the clouds, spilling light across the bay. The surface of the water shimmered not gold this time, but pure silver, clean. And in that reflection, just for an instant, she thought she saw a faint silhouette. Wet beneath the waves, the ghost of the king's tide, whole again, its grand sign flickering softly in the deep. King's tide fortune awaits. Then the wind shifted, and it vanished. Lena smiled faintly. Not anymore, she whispered. She turned toward the road leading back to Silverstrand, her steps slow but sure. Behind her, the tide rolled out gently, the whisper of waves following her like a farewell. The sea had taken what was owed. Now, at last, it was returning what was hers. Months passed before the sea spoke again. By then, Silverstrand had learned how to breathe without fear. The storms that once battered the coast had softened into seasonal rain, and the endless gray horizon had begun to show streaks of light again. The ocean still whispered, as it always would, but its voice was no longer a threat. It was memory steady, rhythmic, eternal. The town that had once turned away from its curse was now turning toward its rebirth. The king's tide was gone, buried forever beneath the waves, but in its absence something else began to rise, something not gilded in greed, but rooted in forgiveness. And at the center of it stood Lena Carter. She watched from the boardwalk one bright morning as the foundations of a new building took shape where the casino once stood. The sound of hammers and laughter replaced the moan of old machinery. Children played near the waterline, collecting shells where gold coins had once glimmered. The new structure wasn't tall or extravagant. It wasn't meant to be. It was built low to the shore, open to the light. Its design simple wood, glass, and stone reclaimed from the wreckage. The townspeople had insisted on that. Every beam, every nail carried a story. It wasn't a casino anymore. It was something else, a community center, an art space, a place for memory, not money. Lena had refused the inheritance pay out the state had offered her after the ledgers were authenticated. Instead, she'd donated it all back to the town. The fortune that sank the king's tide, she'd told them, should finally be used to lift it. At first, they hadn't believed her. For years, she'd been the outsider, the woman who'd brought back the curse. But when she began rebuilding, when she stood beside them every day, hauling wood, sketching plans, hammering nails with her own blistered hands, they saw what she meant. Silver Strand began to heal with her. The tide no longer swallowed the shoreline, it caressed it. The air no longer smelled of rot and loss, but of seagrass and paint. Fishermen returned to the bay, their nets heavy again. The whispers that had once haunted the town's edge were replaced by music from the construction site, soft jazz and laughter drifting across the water. Some nights, Lena would stay long after the workers left, sitting by the shore with her boots half buried in sand. The moonlight painted the waves in silver, and sometimes when the tide shifted just right, she swore she could still see faint golden ripples deep beneath the surface, not menacing anymore, just distant and quiet, like something finally at rest. She always whispered the same words when she saw them, "Thank you." Behind her, the unfinished building gleamed under the moon. Its design echoed fragments of the old casino, the arches, the curved windows, but gentler now, humbled. The ballroom that had once echoed with greed would soon host art shows, music nights, and wedding dances. The tide would watch, and it would not take. Lena smiled faintly. The king's tide, she said to herself, finally found its kingdom. Footsteps crunched behind her. She turned to see Cher, if Hale walking down the beach, hands in his coat pockets. His hair had gone grayer since that night, but his eyes were softer. "Should have known you'd be here," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" Lena replied. "The sound of the sea's too quiet." He chuckled. "That's a first for Silverstrand." She gestured toward the construction site. "They're calling it the Tide House. You believe that? I told them it was too sentimental, but they insisted." "Town's earned a little sentiment," Hale said. "Besides, you're the reason it's here." Lena looked back at the horizon. "I just paid a bill that wasn't mine." "Still counts," he said. A gust of wind swept over them, carrying the faint scent of salt and sawdust. The tide hissed softly against the sand, patient and kind. Hale's gaze followed hers. "You ever wonder if it's really gone? The vault, the curse, all of it?" Lena thought for a moment before answering. "Gone, no, but I think it finally found peace." He nodded slowly, hands tightening in his pockets. "Then maybe so did you." She smiled faintly. "I'm working on it." He started back toward town, his voice fading with the wind. "You're good for this place, Carter. Don't forget that." When he was gone, Lena turned her eyes back to the water. The setting sun had turned the sea gold again, not the sharp gold of coins, but the soft gold of light, warm, fleeting, human. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the final coin. She'd kept the one etched with Freed. It was tarnished now, the inscription barely visible. She turned it over in her palm, then tossed it gently into the waves. The coin spun once in the air, caught the last light of the sun, and disappeared beneath the tide. The ripples faded quickly, but for a heartbeat, just one, the reflection of a crown shimmered across the surface. Lena watched it, her heart steady, balance kept. She whispered. The sea gave no answer this time. It didn't need to. Behind her, the workers lit lanterns around the half-built tidehouse, their laughter echoing through the dusk. Music drifted faintly from a nearby radio, an old jazz melody, familiar and soft, the kind her uncle used to play when he thought no one was listening. The sound made her smile. The ghosts of Silverstrand were gone, but their stories remained, not as warnings now, but as lessons carved into the very air. Lena stood and brushed sand from her coat. The tide washed over her boots, cool and gentle. The sea had taken everything she was, and in return it had given her something better, the chance to begin again. As the last light of evening melted into the waves, she whispered to the horizon, her voice soft but certain, "You kept your promise." The wind carried her words away, out across the quiet bay where the King's Tide once stood. And somewhere deep below, unseen and eternal, the sea exhaled a sound not of anger or hunger anymore, but of peace. For the first time in half a century, Silverstrand slept without fear, and Lena Carter, standing at the edge of its rebirth, felt the tide turn for the very last time. Spring arrived softly in Silverstrand, not with storms or tides this time, but with sunlight that lingered and mornings that smelled of new paint and wildflowers. The town that once whispered curses now hummed with life again. Boats lined the rebuilt pier, gulls circled lazily above the calm bay, and laughter, real laughter, carried through the streets for the first time in decades. Where the King's Tide Casino once towered, a new building now stood, the Silverstrand Tidehouse. Its wide glass walls caught the light of dawn and threw it back across the ocean, so that every morning the sea itself shimmered gold, not from greed, from grace. Lena Carter walked through its open archway, her footsteps echoing gently on the polished stone. The scent of cedar and salt air filled the atrium. The murals on the walls were painted by local artists, scenes of fishermen, families, and the bay itself, bright and unbroken. In the center of the main hall, where gamblers once placed their bets, stood a sculpture of a single wave, carved from marble salvaged from the casino's ruins. At its base, a small plaque read, "Balance kept." She paused before it, her reflection mingling with the curve of the sculpture, and felt the quiet ache of memory rise in her chest. So much had been lost here, so much buried and paid for in full. Yet as she looked around at the volunteers cleaning paintbrushes, at the children darting between displays, at the laughter echoing through the hall, she realized something profound. The sea had taken the gold, yes, but it had left behind something far more valuable, the will to rebuild. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Carter." She turned to see a young woman, maybe 20, hair tied back, a name tag pinned to her shirt. "Evelyn Restoration Team." "They're waiting for you outside," Evelyn said, smiling nervously. "The ribbon cutting's about to start." Lena smiled. "I'll be right there." Evelyn nodded and hurried off, leaving Lena alone with the echo of the sea just beyond the glass. She took one last look at the wave sculpture, running her fingers along the cool marble. "We did it," she whispered. "We finally brought you peace." Outside, a crowd had gathered along the boardwalk. Reporters, townsfolk, even tourists from nearby cities had come to see what they called the miracle of Silverstrand. The air buzzed with excitement, the sound of cameras clicking mingling with the hush of the ocean. The mayor gave a brief speech, hopeful, rehearsed, full of gratitude. But when it was Lena's turn to speak, the applause quieted, and even the wind seemed to pause to listen. She stepped up to the small podium, sunlight glinting off the waves behind her. Her voice was steady, low, carrying the weight of every secret and every promise that had ever lived beneath those tides. 50 years ago, she began, the King's Tide Casino was built on greed, on broken promises, on the idea that fortune could last forever if you buried the truth deep enough. She looked toward the horizon, but the sea doesn't forget. It waits, it balances, and when it finally returns what's been taken, it does so to remind us that some treasures aren't meant to be claimed, only understood. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd: fishermen, widows, children, old workers who'd once feared to even speak the casino's name. "This place isn't about what we lost," she said softly. "It's about what we learned. That redemption doesn't come from gold or glory. It comes from facing what drowned us and choosing to rise again." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the gulls circling above seemed to quiet. Lena reached for the ribbon, cutting scissors. The blade caught the light silver and simple. She smiled faintly. The tides turned. She said, "Let's begin again." The ribbon snapped cleanly. Applause erupted, loud and joyful. The doors opened, and the people of Silverstrand flooded into the new tide house, their footsteps filling the space where ghosts once lingered. Lena stepped aside, letting them pass. She didn't need to lead anymore. The town could carry itself now. Later that evening, when the sun began to set, she found herself alone again on the boardwalk. The ocean shimmered like glass, its surface painted in shades of rose and gold. The reflection of the tide house rippled softly, glowing against the dusk. She took off her shoes, letting the surf wash over her feet. The water was warm, not the biting cold of the cursed bay she once knew. It hummed gently against her skin like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind whispered across the water, carrying the faintest echo of a voice she hadn't heard in months. "You kept your word." Lena smiled. "So did you." The tide moved closer, touching her ankles, her calves not pulling her in this time, just brushing against her like an old friend. In the reflection of the fading light, she thought she saw them faint, distant, the shapes of those who'd been lost. Ezra, standing beside Mason, the casino workers, the dancers, the gamblers, all of them watching from the horizon, faces soft with peace. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their silence was a benediction. The water around her shimmered once more, then stilled. She turned back toward the tide house, where laughter spilled through open windows, mingling with the song of the sea. Lanterns glowed along the railings, their lights mirrored perfectly on the calm surface below. It looked as though the ocean itself had joined the celebration. As she walked toward the doors, the sky deepened to violet, stars beginning to pierce the twilight. The first strains of a familiar melody drifted through the air, the same jazz tune that had played the night the King's Tide sank. Only now it wasn't mournful, it was tender, forgiving. Lena stopped for a moment, closing her eyes as the music wrapped around her. Every note carried a promise that no matter how deep the water, light could always find its way through. When she finally stepped inside, the crowd welcomed her with warmth. Children ran past her, laughing, their reflections flickering across the polished floor like ripples of pure joy. She looked up toward the skylight, clear, open, moonlight streaming through, and whispered, barely audible beneath the music, "This is what it was meant to be." Outside, the tide continued its quiet rhythm. The sea no longer waited for debt or penance. It had learned, at last, to let go. And beneath the waves where the King's Tide once stood, no gold gleamed, no curses stirred, only the soft, eternal glow of peace finally earned. As the night deepened, lanterns floated out to sea, carrying names written in ink, tributes to the lost, offerings to the water. They drifted farther and farther, each light a small echo of hope, a reminder that balance, once restored, could endure forever. Lena stood at the open doors, watching them fade into the horizon. The wind lifted her hair, cool and kind. The past no longer haunted Silverstrand. It illuminated it. And as the music swelled and laughter filled the hall, Lena Carter smiled the kind of smile that only comes after surviving both the storm and the silence that follows. The tide had turned. The sea had forgiven. And the story at long last had found its peace. Dawn came quietly over Silverstrand, soft and gold, the kind of morning that didn't need to announce itself. The sea was still, its surface like polished glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that horizon and heaven seemed to merge into one. For the first time in years, the tide had no secrets. The tidehouse stood peaceful by the shore, its windows open, curtains swaying gently in the early breeze. Inside, the halls were empty now, but traces of last night's laughter lingered, the echo of footsteps, the faint warmth of music. The town's grand reopening had lasted until nearly midnight, a celebration that felt less like an event and more like an exhale, shared by everyone who'd survived the story. Lena Carter sat by the open window in her office overlooking the bay. The desk was cluttered with blueprints, restoration reports, and stacks of letters from nearby towns asking to visit, to learn, to build something similar. She'd barely slept, but her exhaustion wasn't heavy. It was gentle, the good kind, the kind that follows purpose fulfilled. Outside, the gulls drifted across the calm sky, their wings cutting across sunlight that shimmered on the surface of the sea. Every sound was tender now, the soft creak of the dock, the rhythmic sigh of the waves, the whisper of wind that seemed to say, "You did it." She smiled faintly and reached for her coffee, still warm, when a soft knock broke the stillness. Evelyn, the young woman from the restoration team, poked her head through the door. "Morning, Ms. Carter. Sorry to bother you." "You're not," Lena said, her voice tired but kind. "Come in." Evelyn stepped forward, holding a weathered envelope in both hands. It was sealed in wax, the edges worn from salt. This was delivered early this morning. No return address. The courier said it was left in the Tidehouse mailbox overnight. Lena frowned. "Who's it from?" Evelyn shook her head. "No name, but—" She hesitated, then added softly, "It's addressed to you, to Lena Carter, heir of the Tide." The words made something in Lena's chest tighten. She took the envelope carefully, her fingers brushing against the wax seal, stamped not with a crown this time, but with the faint impression of a wave. She knew that symbol. It was the same mark she'd seen carved into the vault, hidden beneath the golden spiral. "Thank you, Evelyn," she said quietly. "You sure you're okay?" the girl asked. "I'm fine," Lena assured her, forcing a small smile. "Go help the crew finish setting up the exhibition room. I'll be down in a few minutes." Evelyn nodded and left, the door closing softly behind her. Lena sat for a long moment, staring at the envelope. The wax shimmered faintly, as if it had caught the morning light in a way it shouldn't have been able to. She turned it over, then broke the seal. Inside was a single folded page, old but preserved, written in handwriting she recognized instantly. Ezra Carter. Her uncle's script flowed across the paper in looping, careful strokes. The ink had faded, but the message was clear. "To whoever bears the Carter name after me, if this letter finds you, then the sea has judged you worthy. I was not. I built the king's tide to house fortune, but in truth I was trying to bury guilt. The gold that built those walls did not belong to me. It belonged to those who worked, suffered, and drowned for my ambition. The vault was my promise to the sea, a covenant written in greed and fear. But the ocean is patient. It does not forgive without reason. You, whoever you are, were meant to come after me, not to inherit my sin, but to redeem it. The curse was never the vault. It was wanting more than enough. If you've read this, it means you've given back what I could not. You've broken the chain. The sea remembers, but it also forgets if we teach it how. Do not build walls of gold again. Build something that breathes. And if one day the tide brings this letter to your door, know that it is not warning you, it is thanking you, with guilt, with hope, Ezra Carter. Lena's breath trembled as she lowered the letter. The words blurred in her eyes, and for a moment, the office around her felt far away, replaced by the memory of the storm, the roar of the vault, the glow beneath the waves. Her uncle had known. All of it, the curse, the debt, the balance, he had known what it meant. And still, he'd left the letter sealed, waiting for someone with enough courage or desperation to find it. She folded the page carefully and looked out the window again. The sea shimmered like a sheet of glass, the reflection of morning light dancing across it like liquid gold. But this time it didn't feel menacing. It felt alive, curious, forgiving. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk. A text from Sheriff Hale, heading down to the pier for the dedication at noon. "You coming?" She typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Before leaving, she placed Ezra's letter in a frame and set it beside the wave sculpture in the Tidehouse's main hall. Beneath it, she wrote a small card in her own hand. "The ocean does not curse. It remembers until we learn to listen." By the time she stepped outside, the town was already gathering near the docks. Banners rippled in the wind, boats bobbed gently in the sunlight, and children ran barefoot through the sand, their laughter carrying across the bay. It was a new Silver Strand now, not rich, not perfect, but alive. And as Lena walked down the pier, the sea glittering beneath her feet, she whispered under her breath, "You can rest now." A small wave lapped against the wooden post as if answering her. She smiled. For the first time, the tide was no longer something to fear. It was simply part of her and she of it. And though she didn't know it yet, far beneath the surface, the vault's crown long dormant pulsed once more, not with hunger this time, but with quiet approval. As the sun climbed higher, the wind carried one last whisper across the water. Not a curse, not a warning, just a name, Lena. And with that, the sea was finally still. The afternoon light was soft and golden, filtering through the glass walls of the Tidehouse like liquid honey. Outside, the sea lay motionless, breathing in slow rhythm with the horizon. The scent of salt, mixed with the sweetness of fresh paint and flowers, placed along the boardwalk, tributes from the townspeople, to mark the day the curse finally broke. Lena Carter stood at the edge of the pier, the letter from her uncle folded carefully inside her jacket. The air around her hummed with quiet life, children laughing somewhere behind her, the distant hum of a fisherman's radio, the rhythmic creak of wooden boats rocking with the tide. Everything was alive, but softly so, as if the town had collectively agreed not to disturb the peace they'd fought so hard to earn. The sea shimmered with the color of late afternoon. Not gold, not blue, something between, like the hue of forgiveness. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the breeze wash over her face. It smelled like new beginnings. When she opened them again, Sheriff Hale was walking toward her from the Tidehouse, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "You disappeared after the dedication," he said, stopping beside her. "I needed a moment." She replied, "The noise. It's too alive for me still." He smiled faintly. "Can't blame you. You spent too long listening to ghosts." Lena looked out over the water. "They're quiet now." He followed her gaze. "Good. They deserve to be." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sea stretched before them, endless and still, reflecting the slow descent of the sun. The wind tugged gently at the pier ropes, making them hum. Then Hale said quietly, "You did something good here, Carter. People will remember this place differently now, not for the greed or the drowning, but for what came after." She nodded, her eyes on the waves. "That's all I ever wanted." He tilted his head. "So what now?" Lena smiled, small but real. "Now I let go." He studied her for a moment. "You're leaving." "I think the sea's done with me," she said softly. "And I'm done with it." She turned toward the horizon, the line where the ocean met the fading sun, and for a fleeting second, She thought she saw it again. The faint outline of the king's tide rising from beneath the waves. Not as a building, but as a reflection, light and memory woven together. It shimmered, then vanished as the next ripple rolled in. She didn't look away. You ever think the sea remembers faces? Hale chuckled. If it does, it probably remembers yours most. Then I hope it remembers me kindly. The sheriff adjusted his hat and began walking back toward town. His voice carried on the breeze. With what you've done, I think it will. When he was gone, Lena remained at the end of the pier, alone again with the water. The sky was bleeding into pink and violet, the sun halfway to sleep. The sound of waves lapping against the posts matched the slow beat of her heart. She reached into her coat and pulled out the last thing she hadn't been able to release, the old bronze key. Its once bright metal had tarnished completely now, green around the edges, dull as driftwood. She turned it over in her palm. "You've done your job," she whispered, and then she let it fall. The key slipped through her fingers, catching the dying sunlight for a moment before vanishing beneath the surface. Tiny rings of water rippled outward, delicate, fleeting, and then the sea grew still again. Lena watched until the last ripple disappeared. She felt something inside her loosen, the invisible weight that had lived in her chest for so long, finally uncoiling. It wasn't sorrow, it wasn't even joy, it was release. She turned from the water and began walking back along the pier, her steps slow, steady, certain. The sound of the town's evening lights clicking on carried through the air a steady rhythm of electricity and life. When she reached the edge of the tide house, Evelyn was there waiting, waving from the steps. "Hey, you missed the toast." Lena smiled. "I've had enough champagne to last a lifetime." The girl laughed. "Then come on, they're lighting lanterns in the courtyard." Together, they walked toward the glowing garden beside the tide house. Strings of paper lanterns swayed gently in the sea breeze, their soft light casting halos across the faces of everyone gathered. Children were writing names on small slips of parchment, the names of loved ones lost to the tide, and tucking them into the lanterns before setting them adrift on the shallow pools built into the courtyard's design. Lena took one of the slips offered to her and hesitated. The pen felt heavy in her hand. Then, carefully, she wrote, "Ezra Carter, Mason Hale, the souls of the King's Tide." She folded the paper, placed it inside the lantern, and lit the wick. The small flame flickered uncertainly, then steadied. She knelt, setting it gently onto the water's surface. The lantern drifted away slowly, its light reflected a dozen times in the ripples. One by one, the others joined it, hundreds of tiny stars floating across the courtyard, each carrying a story the sea had once claimed. Lena stood watching until her lantern merged with the rest, the lights blending together into a slow, moving constellation. For a moment, she thought she saw movement beneath the reflections, not the dead, not ghosts, but the shimmer of something ancient and vast, watching quietly from below. It wasn't threatening, it was content. The sea, it seemed, was remembering not with hunger but with love. As the night deepened, the lanterns floated out from the courtyard into the open bay, carried by the tide. The surface glowed softly, each light a heartbeat fading into distance. Lena felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. "Good night," she whispered. Evelyn appeared beside her, voice gentle. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lena nodded, yes, and quiet, finally quiet. The girl smiled. "Guess that means it's over." Lena looked toward the horizon one last time, the line of lanterns fading into the dark, and shook her head. No, not over, just balanced. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. Somewhere far off, a bellboy chimed a sound not of warning anymore, but of peace. Evelyn touched her shoulder softly. "You coming inside in a minute?" Lena said. She stayed there as the crowd's voices faded into the warmth of the tide house, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. The stars above began to mirror the lanterns below, and for a heartbeat, it was impossible to tell where sky ended and sea began. The world, she thought, was finally in harmony. She closed her eyes, feeling the wind in her hair, the tide brushing faintly against the dock. Balance kept. The whisper came not from the sea this time, but from within her, a memory, a promise, a truth. She turned away at last, walking toward the glowing doors of the tide-house. Behind her, the sea shimmered with the reflection of 1,000 lanterns, each one drifting farther and farther, until the horizon was nothing but light. And as the night deepened over Silver Strand, the water whispered softly against the shore, not with warning, not with sorrow, but with something eternal. Peace. The tide had taken everything once. Now it gave everything back. And in that endless rhythm of give and return, the story of the king's tide of greed, redemption, and grace became part of the ocean's song forever. As the last lantern vanished into the distance, the waves curled gently around the pier, carrying a single word that no one heard but the sea: home. And with that, the ocean and Lena Carter finally rested.